Okay, I think we're ready now. So thank you very much for your patience, everyone. And good afternoon to all our attendees and speakers in Uzbekistan. And also good morning and good evening to all our attendees and speakers from around the world. Welcome to the British Council's Uzbekistan English Language Assessment Conference. This event will offer perspectives on language policy and language assessment in Uzbekistan, and it forms part of a series of conferences called New Directions in English Language Assessment that the British Council organise in East Asia and in Latin America on an annual basis. Thank you all for coming to the first day of this 3-day event. My name is Victoria Clark from the British Council, and I will be moderator for this conference along with some of my colleagues. But before we hear the opening speeches, we would like to introduce some housekeeping. First, while attending today's plenaries and panel discussions, please remember to mute your microphones to avoid any noise disruptions to the session. Also, if you have a question or comment you would like to put forward to the speaker, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen to write the questions, and the moderator will select them for the Q&A sessions. There is also a chat box you can use to introduce yourselves and interact with your fellow attendees. Now it is my pleasure to introduce Waddenham Karim Jonov, the Deputy Minister of Public Education of the Republic of Uzbekistan, who would like to say a few words. Now over, please, to Waddenham.
Good afternoon, good morning, dear colleagues. I hope you can hear my voice. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, dear participants of this conference, British Council Country Director, Ms. Waddenham, and colleagues. It's our great pleasure to participate in today's 9th New Direction Conference. And taking this moment, let me say these regards about the absence of our minister, because he wanted to attend himself and say his words about this conference and all the things happening in developing the foreign languages, specifically English language. But due to government meeting in Samarkand city, he had to attend and move to Samarkand today morning. So of course, topic of the conference is very important for overall for Uzbekistan and of course for the public education sector. And here we are addressing the issues related to quality of education, and through this the economic development of nowadays reforms in Uzbekistan, and many issues related to standardization of education processes and overall international partnerships. So you may know that our government is paying huge attention for promoting foreign languages, and one of the key presidential decrees was signed in May 2021 to more promote or boost the foreign language learning in the country. So, and the main goal of this presidential decree is promoting and creating more opportunities for foreign language teachers and improve the role of the quality of assessment and testing in Uzbekistan. And let me also briefly say some few words about the motivation we are doing for the English language teachers and school children in public education sector. First would be school teachers nowadays who are having the C1 level CEFR certificate are receiving like additional salary allowance for 50%, and school graduates with the foreign language certificates are exempted from the university entry exams. And also, as a next stage, we are planning to issue additional salary allowance for the STEM teachers for teaching their subject in English language. So as you may see, a lot of the motivation and opportunities for teachers, English language teachers, and school children for learning foreign languages. And also it's important to say that nowadays in public education sector, we have over 6 million school kids and 40,000 English language teachers. English language is taught from the first grade in Uzbek schools. And in regards with for above mentioned, I just wanted to emphasize that it's very important that we have a high quality assessment system in place in schools, and high quality of assessment system and evaluation system for the school kids, and of course for the teachers also. So taking this moment, let me on behalf of Ministry of Public Education say big thanks for the British Council and our colleagues for recently launched new project called Future English Project, which is aimed to help school graduates to improve their language and preparing them for local and global markets. And dear colleagues, using this opportunity, I would like to express our appreciation for our partnership with British Council and the support for support of our reforms in promoting English language in Uzbekistan. And I sincerely hope that participants enjoy and have fun on today's and next 2 days conference and debates. And I wish all the participants, very fruitful and effective participation. Thank you very much. Good luck to all of you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Deputy Minister. The next speaker will be Sanjar Obidov, Acting Director of the Agency for Promotion of Foreign Language Learning, who will now give his opening speech. Now over to Sanjar Obidov.
Thank you very much, Victoria. It is a great pleasure to me to participate in this event today. And with your permission, I would like to make my speech in Uzbek. Assalomu alaykum, hurmatli yig'ilish ishtirokchilari, konferensiyamiz ishtirokchilari. Xabaringiz bor, O'zbekiston Respublikasi Prezidentining 2021 yil 19 maydagi 5117 sonli qaroriga muvofiq O'zbekiston Respublikasi Vazirlar Mahkamasi huzuridagi xorijiy tillarni o'rganishni ommalashtirish agentligi tashkil etildi va albatta agentlikning markaziy apparati hamda hududiy vakilliklari faoliyati yo'lga qo'yildi. Hurmatli anjuman ishtirokchilari, agar ruxsatingiz bilan shu agentligimiz oldiga qo'yilgan vazifalarni, muayyan bir vazifalarni alohida ta'kidlab o'tsam. Bu vazifalardan biri bu aholi orasida xorijiy tillarni o'rganishni ommalashtirish va ularni mukammal o'zlashtirish uchun zarur shart-sharoitlar yaratish, xorijiy tillarni o'qitishning xalqaro tan olingan dastur va darsliklari ta'limning barcha bosqichlarida joriy etilishini muvofiqlashtirish hamda o'qituvchilarda zamonaviy o'qitish ko'nikmalarini shakllantirish. Hududlar, tarmoqlar va ta'lim muassasalarining xorijiy tillarni o'zlashtirgan mutaxassislariga ehtiyojlarini tahlil qilish natijalari asosida talab yuqori bo'lgan xorijiy tillarni o'qitishni tashkillashtirish. Xorijiy tillarni o'qitish sohasida bog'cha, maktab, oliy ta'lim tashkiloti, korxona tamoyilidagi uzluksiz ta'lim zanjirini joriy etish maqsadida aholining barcha qatlamlariga mos bo'lgan tilni o'rgatish uslubiyati va tavsiyalarini ishlab chiqishni muvofiqlashtirish. Xorijiy tillarni puxta o'zlashtirish, tilning asosiy ko'nikmalarini shakllantirish uchun videorolik, o'yin, ko'ngilochar ko'rsatuv, film va boshqa o'rgatuvchi kontent yaratilishini tashkil etish. Davlat tilidan xorijiy tillarga va albatta xorijiy tillardan davlat tiliga sinxron va professional tarjimani masalalarini yo'lga qo'yish. Hududlar, tarmoqlar, davlat organlari va ta'lim tashkilotlari kesimida xorijiy tillarni bilish reytingini yuritish. Xorijiy tillarni o'rganishda yanada ommalashtirish bo'yicha hukumatga takliflar kiritishlardan iborat. Albatta, bugungi tadbirimiz ham mazkur vazifalar bilan chambarchas bog'liq. Shu o'rinda alohida ta'kidlab o'tmoqchimanki, Vazirlar Mahkamasining 19-maydagi 312-sonli qarorida xorijiy tillarni o'rganishni ommalashtirish agentligi oldiga aholini xorijiy tillarga o'qitish va ularning bilimlarini baholashning xalqaro tan olingan uslublarini joriy qilish vazifasi belgilab berilgan va qolaversa o'qituvchilar uchun malaka talablari va baholash mezonlarini qayta ko'rib chiqib, o'qituvchilarga malaka toifasini berish jarayonini ochiqlik tamoyili asosida tashkil etish vazifalari belgilab berilgan va aynan xorijiy til o'qituvchilariga malaka toifalarini berishda albatta Vazirlar Mahkamasi huzuridagi ta'lim sifatini nazorat qilish davlat inspeksiyasi bilan muayyan bir ishlar amalga oshirilmoqda. Agentlik mazkur vazifalar yuzasini ta'minlash maqsadida ta'lim sifatini nazorat qilish davlat inspeksiyasi bilan hamkorlikda xorijiy tillarni bilish darajasini baholovchi xalqaro tan olingan sertifikatlarning ro'yxati va xorijiy tillarni bilish darajasini belgilovchi milliy va xalqaro tan olingan sertifikatlarning darajasi o'rtasidagi muvofiqlikni ta'minlovchi me'yoriy hujjatni tasdiqladi va albatta bu yo'nalishdagi islohotlarimizning boshlanishi bo'ldi desak mubolag'a bo'lmaydi. Oldin respublikamizda juda ham kam sertifikatlar, xalqaro sertifikatlar tan olingan bo'lsa, aynan mazkur hujjatdan so'ng mazkur tan olinadigan sertifikatlar ko'lami ko'paydi. Sohada raqobatbardosh hamda shaffoflikni ta'minlash bo'yicha chuqur bir mezon sifatida qabul qilindi. Shuni alohida ta'kidlab o'tish joizki, tahlillar asosida ta'lim tashkilotlarida o'rgatilayotgan materiallar hamda ulardan olingan bilimlarni baholash mezonlari o'rtasidagi nomutanosibliklar mavjudligi ham agentlikning mutaxassislari tomonidan aniqlandi. Xorijiy tillarni o'qitishda baholash tizimini ta'limning barcha qatlamlarida uzluksiz ta'lim zanjirini bog'lovchi unsur ekanligini inobatga olgan bo'lsak, bu yo'nalishdagi kamchiliklar sohada aniq choralar ko'rilishini lozimligini ko'rsatmoqda. Shu bois agentlik eng avvalo ta'lim dasturlarini xalqaro tan olingan standartlarga moslash yoki to'liqligicha xalqaro tan olingan dasturlarga tayanish va baholash mezonlarini ham aynan shunga muvofiq xalqaro standartlar asosida amalga oshirishni taklif qilib qoladi. Fikrimizcha, baholash mezonlari va uslublari maktab, kollej, litsey hamda oliygohlarda tatbiq qilingan o'quv reja va dasturlariga monand baholanishi maqsadga muvofiq va albatta bu yo'nalishda ancha ishlarimiz oldimizda bor. Pedagog kadrlarni malakasini oshirish tizimi ham albatta zamon bilan hamnafas ravishda o'z o'quv va reja dasturlarini tubdan qayta ko'rib chiqishi va albatta joriy etilgan xalqaro baholash tizimlarini aynan shu yangi o'quv reja va dasturlarida inobatga olinishi maqsadga muvofiq bo'ladi. Shuni alohida ta'kidlab o'tish joizki, agentlik respublikamizda xalqaro baholash tizimlarining ko'lamini ko'paytirish, sohada sog'lom raqobat muhitini yaratish bilan bir qatorda ta'lim tashkilotlarimizda joriy etilgan o'quv reja va dasturlarini xalqaro standartlar asosida tubdan yangilash kerak ekanligini inobatga olib, mazkur o'quv rejalar ustida keng ko'lamli ishlar amalga oshirilmoqda va albatta mazkur yo'nalishda barcha xorijiy ekspertlarimizni hamkorlikka chaqirib qolamiz. Hurmatli tadbir ishtirokchilari, so'zim yakunida shuni bildirib o'tmoqchimanki, albatta mana agentligimiz tashkil etilgan kundan boshlab Britaniya kengashi bilan juda ham bir chambarchas hamkorlikni boshlaganmiz. O'ylaymanki, mazkur hamkorligimiz kelajagida shu aynan baholash tizimlarining sifatini yanada yangi bosqichlarga olib chiqishga xizmat qiladi. Dear participants of the event, let me say a few words in English too. In the end of my speech, I would like to express my deepest respect and esteem for all who participated in organization of this outstanding event, and I hope following 3 days will be very fruitful for our country and also for enhancing the quality of assessment in Uzbekistan. And I would like to express especially thank you for the British Council in Uzbekistan. For their 25 years, they were enhancing the quality of also education, quality of foreign language teaching, especially English language. And I hope our fruitful cooperation will be directed for all those teachers, students who would like to learn English language. And we are together with all our international experts. We will provide quality education for our future kids. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, the next speaker will be Odil Kuisinov, who is the Deputy Chairman of the State Inspectorate for Supervision of Quality in Education. Now can please Odil Kuisinov give his opening remarks. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much, Victoria. Agar ruxsat bersanglar, men o'zbek tilida davom ettirsam mavzuimda. Demak, avvalambor ushbu uchrashuvni, konferensiyani tashkil qilishda yaqindan yordam bergan mana shu Xalq ta'lim vazirligi vakillariga Rustam Karimjonov, Sanjarmon Xo'jayev sizlarga rahmat aytamiz va albatta Britaniya kengashi rahbari Denise Waddenham janoblariga ham o'zimiz tashakkurimizni bildiramiz. Britaniya kengashi tomonidan yurtimizdagi faoliyatning 25 yillik to'lishi munosabati bilan hamda mana shu jamoaning bir samarali mehnatini men chin yurakdan muborakbod etaman va kelgusi faoliyatida, kelgusi yuqori natijaga erishishda ularga ulkan zafarlar, muvaffaqiyatlar tilab qolaman. Shu o'rinda ta'kidlashimiz kerakki, yurtimizda ingliz tilining o'qitilishi, til o'rganishning ommalashishida, tilni o'zlashtirish borasida amaliy ko'nikmalarni shakllantirishda va natijada ta'lim sifatining ijobiy tomonga o'zgarishda Britaniya kengashining o'rni juda ham muhim deb hisoblaymiz. Xabaringiz bor, prezidentimiz tomonidan 2020-yil 6-noyabrdagi ta'lim tarbiya tizimini yanada takomillashtirish to'g'risidagi demak qarorida aynan maktabgacha, umumiy o'rta, professional va oliy ta'lim o'quv dasturlari va fanlarning uzluksiz ta'minlash vazifasi belgilangan va mana shu vazifa bevosita ta'lim inspeksiyasiga muvofiqlashtirishga yuklatilgan. Bundan biz nimani ko'rishimiz mumkin? Biz hozirgi kunda 22 ta fandan bevosita, jumladan ingliz tili fanidan ham maktabgacha ta'limdan to oliy ta'lim tizimigacha bo'lgan o'quv dasturlarining mazmunining uzviyligini ta'minlash, ya'ni soddada murakkabaga qarab borib ketish va bir-birini taqozo qilishi bo'yicha amaliy ishlarni bajarib kelyapmiz. Va bu bo'yicha qariyb 1 yil davomida ekspertlar jalb qildik Xalq ta'lim vazirligidan va ular o'sha ekspertlar bilan birgalikda biz o'quv dasturlarini takomillashtirib, uzviylik TDUZ muhokama portaliga joylashtirib, keyin muhokamadan o'tkazib, hozirgi kunda takomillashtirish ustida ish olib boryapmiz. Ingliz tili fanidan maktabgacha ta'limdan oliy ta'limgacha bo'lgan o'quv dasturlari o'sha tahlil qilinganda takrorlangan mavzular bor ekanligi, o'zaro bir-biriga bog'liq bo'lmagan mavzular bor ekanligini aniqlab, ularni biz bartaraf qilishga harakat qildik va yangi bir mavzular kiritishga va shu asosda o'quv dasturini takomillashtirishga harakat qilib boryapmiz. Bugungi kunda biz bitta yaxshi natijaga erishdikki, mana shu bevosita Britaniya kengashi vakolatxonasini ko'magida, ularning ekspertlari bilan birgalikda uzviylik konsepsiyasini va uzluksiz ta'lim tizimi uchun milliy o'quv dasturlarini, dastlabki loyihalarni yaratganligimizni aytib o'tishimiz kerak. Bu dastlabki masala bo'lsa, shuningdek, yana e'tiboringizga aytmoqchi bo'lgan narsam, davlatimiz rahbari tomonidan topshiriq asosida ta'lim inspeksiyasi tomonidan respublikamizning 100% maktablarini milliy reyting demak tizimi yaratib, ularni o'sha milliy reyting tizimi asosida baholash vazifasi qo'yilgan edi. Bu milliy reyting tizimida bevosita mana shu umumiy o'rta ta'lim maktablarida demak o'qitish sifatini baholaydigan bo'lsak, yangilik sifatida aytishimiz mumkinki, bu yilgi milliy reytingimizda biz Qoraqalpog'iston Respublikasi Vazirlar Kengashi raisi, viloyatlar, Toshkent shahar tuman hokimlari, ularning ta'lim tarbiya masalalari bo'yicha maslahatchilari hamda maktab rahbarlari va pedagogik jamoa faoliyatiga baho berish amaliyoti joriy etildi. Ya'ni avvallari biz faqat milliy reytingda o'sha maktab ma'muriyatiga yoki jamoasiga baho bergan bo'lsak, mana bu yilda bir yangilik bo'ldiki, bevosita o'sha maktab joylashgan tuman hokimi yoki o'sha hokim o'rinbosarlarining faoliyatiga ham baho berish joriy qilindi. Va eng asosiysi mana shu baho berish jarayonida indikatorlar sifatida o'sha maktabda dars berayotgan o'qituvchi va o'quvchilarning ingliz tilini bilish sertifikatiga ega ekanligi alohida indikator sifatida kiritildi. Biz mana joriy yilda 14 ta hududdagi 207 ta tuman va shaharlarda joylashgan 9622 ta maktabda faoliyati o'rganilib, ularni milliy reyting chiqarildi. Bu reyting mezonlarini belgilashda biz xalqaro tajribalardan, Buyuk Britaniya, Finlyandiya, AQSh, Janubiy Koreya, Rossiya kabi bir qancha davlatlarning o'sha ta'limdagi tajribalarini o'rganib, o'quvchilarni hayotga tayyorlash ya'ni bilim darajasini aniqlash bo'yicha ishlarni olib bordik. Va jumladan men bir ozgina natijalar haqida ma'lumot beradigan bo'lsam, mana shu chet tillarini bilish bo'yicha xalqaro yoki milliy sertifikat olgan o'quvchilar salmog'iga ko'ra eng ko'p o'sha top 10 deymiz, top 10 talikda Mirobod, Yunusobod, Yakkasaroy, Mirzoobod, Chilonzor tumanlari va shu bilan bir qatorda viloyatdan Urganch, Zarafshon, Buxoro, Jizzax, Navoiy viloyatlari yuqori o'rinlarni olganini keltirib o'tishimiz mumkin. O'quvchilar o'sha chet tilini bilish darajasi bo'yicha milliy reytingda tashqari reytingda kiritilishi endilikda nafaqat maktab rahbari va pedagogik jamoasining, balki o'sha hokimlarning belgilanishi hokimlarimizni bevosita maktabga, ya'ni ta'lim sifatiga e'tiborini kuchaytirishga omil bo'ladi deb hisoblaymiz. Shuningdek, maktabgacha, umumiy o'rta maxsus va professional maktabdan tashqari ta'lim tashkilotlarining kamida S1 darajadagi milliy yoki unga mos darajadagi xalqaro sertifikatga yoxud tegishli darajadagi tilni o'qitishning kasbiy mahoratlarini aniqlovchi sertifikatga ega bo'lishlari, men o'ylaymanki, chet tili fani bo'yicha o'quvchilarning har bittasiga sertifikatga ega bo'lish natijasida 80 ballga erishishimizni ko'rsatib o'tganmiz. Bu ham bir ijobiy natija sifatida aytishimiz mumkin. Shuningdek, 2020-21 o'quv yili 15-oktyabr holatiga umumta'lim maktablarida 41.210 nafar ingliz tili o'qituvchilar faoliyat olib borishni keltirishimiz mumkin. Chet tillari o'qituvchilarining kasbiy salohiyatlarini aniqlash maqsadida o'tgan 2020-yilda 10.676 nafar chet tili o'quvchilari attestatsiyadan o'tkazildi. Mazkur attestatsiya jarayonlari ikki bosqichda bo'lib o'tdi. Birinchisi ta'lim inspeksiyasi tomonidan test olingan bo'lsa, ikkinchisi bevosita chet tili o'quvchilarining dars o'tish mahorati va mehnat samaradorligi baholandi. Va natijada chet tillar o'qituvchilarining attestatsiyasi natijasiga ko'ra 565 nafar, ya'ni 5% oliy malaka toifasiga erishdi. 1580 nafari, ya'ni 15% birinchi malaka toifasiga, 3548 nafar 33%, demak, ikkinchi malaka toifasi va 3049 nafari 28% mutaxassislik malaka darajasi berilganini ta'kidlashimiz mumkin. Umid qilamizki, kelgusidagi yanada hamkorlik natijasida yuqorida qayd etilgan indikatorlar bo'yicha bundan da ijobiy ko'rsatishlarni qayd etamiz. So'zim so'ngida mana shu tadbir tashkilotchilariga yaqindan hamkorlik uchun o'z minnatdorchiligimizni bildirib, konferensiya ishiga muvaffaqiyatlar tilaymiz. E'tibor uchun rahmat.
Okay, thank you very much, Deputy Chairman. And now we have Ayukan Rajiv, Director of Scientific Research Institute, named after our Avloni, who will say a few words. We have no speech at the moment, Mark. Mark, we don't have speech. Oh, okay. Not yet. Apologies, we're just trying to get the voice activated. No, not at the moment. Still can't hear anything at the moment.
Vicky, can you see it?
No, we cannot hear anything. We can see the video, but we are unable to hear what the director is saying. Can you try again, please?
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, dear
Okay,
Minister,
we can hear.
British Council Country Director Ms. Waddenham, and colleagues from local ministries and international organizations. For those who don't know me, my name is Ayukan Rajiv, and I am the director of Avloni Research Institute, the organization which is responsible for studying the issues in and around school education and offering solutions to them based on solid research. And also, I would like to thank to British Council for their close partnership with Avloni Research Institute in improving language skills and teaching competences of school English teachers, language teachers through various CPD courses, and for sharing one of the biggest events organized with UNICEF on November 5th, 2021. We have a lot to respect and appreciation to British Council, and we look forward to maintaining and broadening such fruitful cooperation and collaboration in the near future. Speaking of assessment, which is the main topic for this event, I would like to bring to your attention some of our initiatives and projects in the field. We believe that the end product we are going to get from these projects will add to the process of reforming the field of assessment in education sector. As you may know, up until quite recently, the important document constituting the foundation of assessment of teachers' knowledge and skills in the field of public education didn't exist. As you have probably guessed it, I am speaking about professional standards. With the partnership with UNICEF, we have developed professional standards of school teachers and principals, which define what professional attributes, professional knowledge and understanding, and professional skills a teacher or school principal should have. These important documents also provide the clarity of the expectations for the professions and what teaching and managing a school look like. I believe they are very instrumental in keeping every key stakeholder on the same page. Furthermore, based on the agreement between the Ministry of Public Education and Japan International Cooperation Agency, JICA, the appointed organizations from Uzbek side of Learning Research Institute and from Japanese side, K-Advanced, collaborating to create assessment model on math for school pupils. Similar to IELTS and TOEFL in the English language, this model will serve to assess the student's knowledge, but on a different subject. It will also indicate strengths and weaknesses of a student in the sector and provide recommendations to further work on themselves. It is a 2-year project during which we are planning to evaluate math knowledge of 40,000 from 8th till 10th grade students across Uzbekistan. The outcome of this project will contribute greatly to the field of assessment in education. When it comes to local projects with local experts, under the support of the Ministry of Public Education, we are now developing assessment model of Uzbek language by studying international experience. This assessment model will evaluate the level of knowledge and skills of a school graduate on 4 language components, which are reading comprehension, listening comprehension, and written and oral speech. If historically the lessons of mother tongue and literature at schools were directed towards teaching grammar and memorizing stories and poems, we know we are changing it to modern communicative approach which focus on language levels. In this regard, this project also attempts to develop the level of skills such as A1, A2, B1, B2 on Uzbek language and arts. Dear colleagues, these were the projects by Learning Research Institute that I wanted to enlighten you on. And taking this opportunity, I would like to thank once again British Council for giving me such wonderful chance, and I hope the conference will serve as a stepping stone to further develop the field of assessment of foreign languages in the public education sector of the Republic of Uzbekistan. Thank you very much for your attention.
Okay, thank you very much. And it is now my pleasure to present Denise Waddenham, the Country Director of the British Council Uzbekistan, to say the last few words. Now over to Denise.
Thanks very much, Vicky, and hello everybody. It's brilliant to see so many of you taking part in this the opening of this conference. I'm really delighted to be here. I'd like to thank all of our partners and speakers who have been speaking so far. I've only been in Uzbekistan for a little over a month, as some of you know, and I've been really impressed by the scale and ambition of the educational reforms here and the commitment to improving teaching, learning and student outcomes. So it's really timely to be discussing the pivotal role that assessment plays in all of this. And it's just great to have so many of you with us online today. Of course, the aim is to engage with all major stakeholders and together devise a strategic vision for assessment as an integral part of reforms, and to unpack the fundamental principles behind modern communicative quality tests and clarify how these can inform pedagogical practices to ensure better student outcomes. Now, I've already heard a couple of speakers mention our 25th anniversary, so I know that you're all aware that we are celebrating 25 years of the British Council in Uzbekistan. Over the past 25 years, we've worked in close partnership with the government of Uzbekistan, the ministries of education and culture, and a really wide range of education and cultural institutions and professional networks and individuals. And the British Council's programme in Uzbekistan responds to the large-scale national reform and capacity development agendas in education and culture. English reform has been one of the most important areas of our work over the past 25 years, with major highlights being our contribution to the development of national standards for English teaching, reform of pre-service teacher training in 18 universities in Uzbekistan, development of the national ESP curriculum benefiting more than 40 universities, and very recently, in collaboration with the Ministry of Public Education, development of the National English Curriculum Delivery Strategy, and the launch of a new Future English project, aiming to help school graduates to improve their English and offer English teachers all over the country brand new continuing professional development programs. As you're probably aware, New Directions is a series of expert-led regional events that bring international and national perspectives on trends and approaches in English language assessment. The New Directions series being sub-events that take place throughout the year in various countries around the world. Obviously, traditionally, before the COVID-19 pandemic, this would have been a face-to-face event, but we do hope that this online format will help to ensure really good geographical access and representation and make it accessible to perhaps those of you who wouldn't normally have been able to attend if the conference had indeed been face-to-face in Tashkent or somewhere else. And given the numbers, I can see over 500 people joining us, so I'm really delighted there's so many of you here. Finally, it's fitting that our conference is taking place to coincide with International Education Week across the world. And I believe our event will contribute to international debate around quality learning and assessment, and highlight the role of partnerships in education to create new opportunities for young people. So I really wish you very enjoyable, fruitful discussions over the next 3 days. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Denise, and thank you to all our speakers for their opening remarks. Now we are going to move on to hear our first plenary session of the day by Professor Barry O'Sullivan on the Comprehensive Learning System and Language Policy. Barry O'Sullivan, OBE, is the Head of Assessment Research and Development at the British Council, where he is responsible for the design and development of the APTIS test service. He has undertaken research across many areas on language testing and assessment and its history, and has worked on the development and refinement of the socio-cognitive model of test development and validation since 2000. But before I hand over to Professor O'Sullivan, can I ask all of you in the audience, if you have any comments or questions, to please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. My colleagues and I will collate your questions and comments and pass them on to Professor O'Sullivan after his plenary when we have the Q&A session. So thank you very much. And now over to Professor Barry O'Sullivan.
Good morning. I'd like to say good morning, Uzbekistan. I've never said that before. Thank you very much to the British Council in Uzbekistan, to the ministry in Uzbekistan, and particularly, I think, to Vicky, who's done an amazing job, I have to say, in pulling this event together. It's been an amazing achievement over the last number of months. It's a shame that I can't be in Uzbekistan today. I think it would be a great place to visit. And I hope at some stage down the line, I get to see you all face to face. Right, I'm going to attempt to share my screen now to. This is it.
Okay, Barry, we can see that.
That was the correct answer. Thank you very much. So today, my talk is about what I call the comprehensive learning system and the importance of the comprehensive learning system to policy and policy decision making. We've worked in the British Council with ministries from around the world, me personally over the last 10 years since I joined the British Council. And one of the things I find so often happens is that there's a lack of communication, if you like, across the system. And we get systems that have very good individual units, but don't seem to work. They don't give the results that people want. So probably close to 10 years ago, I started to think really seriously about what is the problem and how can we fix it? And my solution was to this idea of a comprehensive learning system. So what is it? Let's take a quick look at it. A comprehensive learning system can be thought of really simply at its most basic as a triangle. And anybody who knows me and hears me talking at conferences, when I talk about policy, I always talk about the triangle. If the triangle isn't there, isn't in place, and isn't in alignment, the system doesn't work. It's very simple. It is not rocket science. It's something that anybody can understand. Now let's think about it in a little detail, but always remember that triangle. That's the one thing to take away from today. If you don't agree with anything I say, if you don't understand anything I say, think of the triangle, because all of those three elements, the curriculum, the delivery of the curriculum, and the assessment within the system must all be in alignment. Now let's think about what that means. First of all, we'll think about the curriculum. For a start, the curriculum must be underpinned by a set of comprehensive standards. If we don't have standards, we don't have a system. Now, I know from a very interesting publication by Musoeva from maybe last year that the CEFR is quite well adopted within the education system, the English and languages education system in Uzbekistan. And I know that that dates back almost a decade. And that's a really positive start, because the CEFR is an important document. It's very important that the CEFR is seen as presenting the basis for a standard. I don't see the CEFR itself as a standard. I think it's a wonderful framework. It's a very strong framework for language and language progression. It's also a strong framework for understanding what the elements of language might be that we need to assess. But it's not a set of standards in itself, because the standards set specific benchmarks. Now, the CEFR never set out to be a set of standards. And if you read all of the documentation around it, the CEFR is the underlying framework. What makes the standards is when we localize, when we understand that this system is now adapted for use within our own country, within our own education system. So, for example, we've worked with colleagues around the world on how to look at localization of the CEFR for a particular education system. And a very successful one, for example, has been done in Japan with CEFR-J. And we know that there's a CEFR-T coming up in the next number of years. And there are various other localized versions of it. These are not radically different, but what they do is they focus in on a particular education system. So, for example, in Japan, it was recognized that many students were at A1 level, very, very low levels of English language particularly. So what they did with that was they took the CEFR and then zoomed in on A1 and expanded the number of descriptors at A1 so that you got a fine grain. So instead of having an A11 and an A12, they have an A11, 2, and 3. So they more clearly define A1 for their own system. There are some other changes, but that's the main difference for the CEFR-J. So that's a very good example of localization. But since the CEFR is already known and well known, according to Ms. Eva, by teachers as well as policymakers in Uzbekistan, that's a really, really strong positive start. But as I said, it's got to be context appropriate. So we need to look at that CEFR to make sure that we're looking at it as it would work well in Uzbekistan. The curriculum should, especially in these days of the internet, take into account not just formal learning, the formal learning at school or at home with homework, and some of that homework is provided by school, other is indicated by school to look at various things, like maybe look at a film and talk about it or whatever, write about it. But also things like informal learning. Nowadays, there's such a huge number of apps available, for example, just on your phone to give you an idea of what kind of things you can do. You can learn about vocabulary, pronunciation, speaking, a little bit about reading. There's quite a lot out there that you can do. And we know that students are actively engaged in that. I'll give you an example. My 5-year-old grandson, I found just a few weeks ago watching a YouTube channel where it was actually teaching him phonics. He was teaching himself how to read, basically. He didn't know that. He loved the program, but he could pronounce the letters and he's learning how to read, basically teaching himself using YouTube. I was shocked, surprised, especially since he doesn't have a lot of staying power. He's a typical 5-year-old boy. But it happens, and people are using these informal opportunities to learn more and more. We see films and TV with subtitles, a very useful way of learning. Also, we know that in many of the North European countries where English language take-up and English language ability is fantastically high, they don't use dubbing, they use subtitling only. And that is a deliberate effort to force people to start listening to the language so it becomes a live activity. Obviously, gaming, online gaming is a big thing that younger people do, younger than me, although some people might vintage do, I guess. But these are all informal learning opportunities that when we're building a system, we should at least recognize and understand the possibilities of these learning opportunities, and maybe even point people towards some or propose to companies that these are things that you might do. So it's not totally passive on the behalf of the policymakers. It is something that we should actively consider. So we think of the curriculum then as something both formal and rigid and built into the system, and informal and available and interestingly different, shall we say, to learners. So it should be all of these things, and we need to take it into account. Delivery looks at everything else. How we get the curriculum from the curriculum document into the classroom and into the real world of learning. And it starts with the teacher. Everything revolves around the teacher as far as I'm concerned. And I suppose I am a bit biased. I started my career many years ago as a teacher in a secondary school in Dublin, in Ireland. And so as far as I'm concerned, the teacher is the center, the teacher is the core. So we should be thinking about this at all stages of the teacher's progression, if you like, from selection, training, professional development, monitoring and evaluation of their participation in education, etc. Everything around what the teacher does should be packaged, if you like, and should be looked at from the perspective of the standards, always. So the standards drive everything. And there should be that clear connection from selection to training, pre-service, in-service, etc. We also think of the same of materials, whether these are textbooks, whether they're ministry made, teacher made, or whatever. Any kind of materials should be linked to the curriculum and to the standards. Now we're actually producing a new version of the manual for linking not just assessments, but curricula and materials to the CEFR at the moment. We hope it will be published early next year, a group of people. So keep your eyes open from a combination of the British Council and EALTA, the European Association for Language Testing and Assessment, and UCALTA, the UK Association. So that's a joint project where we're building the building blocks for a manual for helping people to look at not just assessment linking to the CEFR, but materials and curriculum. So that's something to be aware of. That's coming in the next year. We also need to think of the physical environment. Is the physical environment of the classroom going to allow for the kind of teaching that we wish? So we know, for example, from, well, at least I know from Musaeva, that's the only thing I really have read very much about. I've read a few other things about Uzbekistan. We know that there is a move, there has been probably for the last 9 years anyway, a move away from the grammar translation method into communicative method. So it's still a bit edgy, and that's typical, that very commonly happens. It takes some time for a transition to happen fully. Is the classroom allowing that to happen? For communication, we need freedom. We need to be able to move around. We need to be able to group people. We need to be able to work in solo. We need different combinations. In many places, their desks are sometimes bolted to the floor. You can't actually move the desk. So you physically can't move things, the furniture around. You can't move things around to make it more possible to do this kind of activity. The other problem with these activities is they're noisy. And having been an English teacher once in my life, I know that that noise can upset your maths teacher next door or your science teacher on the other side. So what we've got to try to do is to make sure that the rooms are built in a way that they're soundproof enough to allow for these activities to happen. So we need a physical environment to reflect the needs of the curriculum. We also need, at all levels, from the departmental to school, regional, national, at all levels, we need leadership. And that leadership needs to buy into the changes. It needs to be part of the system. It needs to be demonstrating, they need to be the champions, if you like, of the system. So that right down through from the classroom to the ministry, there's a connection and everybody is moving in that same direction. That's not an easy thing to achieve, but it's something that will ensure that what you're trying to achieve at the policy level can find its way into the classroom. Otherwise, the links down into the classroom are too vague and they don't often happen. The other delivery bit, which we have less control of, but is informal learning. And from a policy perspective, we can look at informal learning by making or helping the ministry, the government, to make decisions around movies and in cinemas and on TV, for example, on overseas programs on TV, about using subtitles, for example. That's something that should be considered from early on. So we can have some input into it, but we don't have the kind of control we have over the rest. That's obvious, I think, to anybody. In terms of assessment, now we know that there's quite a lot of work being done on high stakes and summative assessment.
I think Barry may have frozen, perhaps just for me. I think you're back, Barry. I can't hear you, Barry. Second. Okay, we're back. So I think we lost you for a little bit, Barry. Apologies for interruption. I think you're back now. Can you speak?
I can speak.
Okay, I can hear you again. Thank you.
Okay. Sorry about that, folks. I have no idea what's happening. Me and the internet don't always talk together. We also have to think of medium stakes summative assessments, such as placement, progress, or achievement. All of these need to be built into the system. Assessment shouldn't be a surprise. You shouldn't have students coming in to your class on a Friday and you think, oh, I'm feeling a bit tired and lazy, I'll just give them a test. That is absolutely anathema. We should not be thinking that way. Every piece of assessment should be planned and built into the system. So when we're looking at the syllabus, when we're looking at what is our program of study for the year, we should be able to say when our assessments are in there and why. We should be assessing as little as possible, of course, but we also need enough assessment in the system so that we understand how progress is happening. And for both the learners and the teachers, because everybody needs to know where they are. You can't just get lost in space somewhere and have no idea where your learning is going. Another critical part, we hear an awful lot of talk these days about formative assessment, but most of the talk I hear about formative assessment is just wrong, because people think formative assessment is ongoing classroom assessment. And it is, but for true formative assessment, we never give a score. We never take formative assessment into account in the overall performance. That's a continuous assessment, and that's either a medium stakes or even sometimes a high stakes assessment position. The reason it's not formative is not a good word in many ways to describe. Formative and summative, actually, when you think about it. Really, when we're talking about these different things, a summative assessment is a judgmental assessment. I am making a judgment about you. Where are you? Bang, bang, bang. Where are you? In a formative assessment, it's not judgmental. I don't make any judgment. It's developmental. It's all about helping you to move forward, helping you with your learning. So formative assessment is something that any self-respecting teacher does every day, all the time. A teacher is always looking to see, has this person learned it? Are they lost? Do they fully understand what we're trying to do here? So a lot of that assessment is very informal, but it's designed to help people to move along. You're not making a judgment about them. And occasionally you will have diagnostic or classroom practice assessments where you just build them into your class, just to say, have they actually understood what I'm saying? And you're not saying, okay, they haven't, but that's not in a judgmental way. You're saying, well, what part of it do they not get? And what can I do to help them on to move forward? So it is a formative, developmental way of thinking about assessment. And we need teachers to understand that and understand the difference between judgmental and developmental assessments. That, of course, links us back from assessment into teacher education, of course. As I said right at the beginning, for this sort of system to work, we need standards. Now, we know that there are sets of standards out there, for example, the Canadian language benchmarks, China standards of English. These are standards that have been developed within education systems, specifically for those education systems. The frameworks we use, CAFRJ, Common European Framework, are there to help us to develop the standards. They're not necessarily the standards themselves, but they are a critical part of that system. But frameworks and standards are there to help us understand two things, I guess. One part of what they're there to help us to understand is what language should learners be acquainting themselves with. I'm not so sure what learning is the right word. What is the target language for these students? What are the kind of activities that those students need to be engaged in? And then what are the transitions? How do you move from A1 on to A2? What's the difference? What are the different things that you need to be doing? And where do you need to be at different stages through the progression? Now, it can't be, it's not a step ladder. And we know that some assessment groups use very rigid underlying mathematical scales, which are a bit ridiculous. Like, you know, when you put a word on a scale and say that telephone is at a level of 92 and mobile phone is at a level of 111. You know, it is a bit daft when you think about it like that. So language doesn't allow itself really to be measured as accurately, as clearly as that. But it does allow for general understanding of the different relevant differences between different aspects of language. And we need to take that into account. The critical thing about all of this is that where we have non-alignment in a system, we have breakdown. And that can happen when one or more elements are not aligned. So if we have a break in the system, so for example, if we take a curriculum from the internet, which we amazingly see so often, somebody takes a curriculum that's been developed for another context and just uses it as it is, thinking, oh, if they did it, if they're using it, it must be good. Now, that's not necessarily going to work in your context. The system has to be built to work within your own context. Otherwise, you have a problem. If any of those aspects of delivery, teacher selection, training, any of the elements within the headings breaks down and is not connected and is not considered through the framework, then we have a problem, because then the delivery breaks down. So for example, you can have a wonderful curriculum, you can have wonderful assessment, but if you buy a bunch of textbooks from a company who haven't actually looked at how clearly the contents of the textbook reflect the curriculum and the education context, well then your system is broken, because the textbooks are leading people down one direction, whereas you're assessing them and expecting their levels to reflect the curriculum through the assessment and curriculum, and that's going a different direction. So your system is broken. And of course, a critical weakness in systems is the adaptation of the inappropriate assessments, particularly within the system. Assessments, it's critical that you get that assessment right, so that the assessment within the system reflects the needs of the system, reflects the curriculum, and reflects the delivery. They should all be working together. We also have to remember, and that this is not a terribly easy thing to achieve. So breakdown is very common. It's not at all unusual for systems not to work. In fact, many systems just don't work. And many systems have never worked, being realistic. And one of the reasons why they haven't worked is that they may have all the bits, they may even all align, but if they don't align to not just a set of standards, but a set of appropriate standards, appropriate to that learning context, then the system is broken again. So there are lots of possibilities to break it, but there are also lots of possibilities to get it to work well. Of course, to make a system work, it's more complicated than just the three. Now, I'm not going to go into it in great detail here, but we have to think of the context of use, in this case, the education system in Uzbekistan, and we have to think about the levels. So for example, at a higher education, and we would say secondary and junior school, it's very important that we have the systems appropriate to each level. It's also very important that we have the transitions between levels accounted for. How many times do we see systems where I learn how to do all of these things in junior school, and then I go into secondary school, and the assumption is you don't know anything about English, so we go back and start all over again. It's just ridiculous. You're wasting time. So what we need to do is to build an entire system. And that's one of the things the Chinese government has attempted to do with the China Standards of English, where they have linked their standards into the education system directly and integrated it fully. And it'll be interesting to follow what happens in China over the next 10 or even 20 years, because it does take quite a lot of time for these things to happen. The consequences of all of this impact on the key stakeholders, and the key stakeholders will differ from country to country, but clearly it's going to be everybody from the candidate, the learner, to their parents and guardians and schools and local education ministries, to the ministry itself, to the government. So the list of people in that stakeholder group is massive. So for them to understand what we're trying to achieve here, we need a theory of action, which is built on a theory of change. The theory of change is a very simple thing. What am I trying to achieve in doing this, in making this change to the system? And from there, we think of the theory of action. How am I going to make it happen? And I then have to learn how to communicate it back to all of those stakeholders. And you know, it's not an easy job to communicate well to all the stakeholders. We have to accept that. Communicating well to the stakeholders is going to mean something very different, whether you're a pupil in a school or a parent or a teacher or a minister or a policymaker or a policy influencer, like a professor at a university, for example. So we need to learn how to communicate what we're doing and how we're doing it and how we're progressing through it to different ways to different people. We also need a development model. We need a very clear idea of how we're going to build the system. We need to set that out on paper before we begin. And we may need, I believe we need an underlying measurement model as well. And the underlying measurement model will be very useful for many reasons. So let's think very quickly about a development model. And this is just one development model, which will always start with the ministry, move on to some sort of a steering group who oversee the development and clarification of the standards and who set in place the development teams. The development teams all work together. Now you can see, and I know from the literature that there are many departments in Uzbekistan. How well do they communicate with each other? Because when we look at all of the different possibilities, if they're not communicating well together, the system is likely to break down. So it's a vital part of the whole system, that the development teams are not just working in silos, that they're working in groups, but they have links into all the other groups and everybody knows what's going on. Otherwise, we tend to get people going down their own path and not bringing the rest of the team with them. And that can only happen if there's a clear system of monitoring and evaluation of that whole system at all times, so that everybody is aware of what's happening and is aware of their responsibility. So the importance of measurement then, I believe, is if we have a clear set of standards, we can develop clearly defined and clearly constructed systems for curriculum development, materials, teacher assessment, etc. If we have an underlying scale, we can then set out clearly what we're trying to achieve at each level of the education system. And this has two benefits. So it'll give us clearly defined levels. So I know that within this level of school, this is the part of the system a person needs to be in, approximately. There will be some variation. So it's not just that we'll have, and I've just put 6 here because of the CFR, you could decide there's 9 for your system, or the Chinese have 12, you know, you may have different numbers. So you have a clearly defined level, but you also have clearly defined transitions. And those transitions are critical, because if you don't get the transitions and the assessments that go with the transitions in place, then your system can break down, because people at level 3 will begin to do work that has already been done in level 2, and you're wasting time. So the CLS can bring clarity of purpose and action. It can bring transparency and promote agreement, promotes professionalization and teamwork, because as you see, the teams have to work in groups, but also work together. It also promotes true accountability and promotes communication to stakeholders. And that, of course, helps us with the development of the system, the delivery of the system, and the evaluation of the system. And if all that comes together, we have success. Without that, maybe. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor O'Sullivan. We have a little time for some questions. 1 minute. Now, I'm going to start with just a quick question, a definition question that someone from the audience has asked. Could you please define what you mean by benchmarks, first of all?
Well, a benchmark is knowing where your starting point is. So, for example, if I want to say my students exiting high school must be at level B2. Well, what level are they at when they join high school? And what is the system, what level are they at leaving the system now? So in one way, when we look at benchmarks, we look at benchmarks of levels within a system. So if I want to make a claim that my system is going to help move students exiting high school from, say, what I think is A2 up to B1, well then I need to know, I need evidence. So the benchmark is the evidence. So a good example of this is the project we did for the ministry in Taiwan, for example, just about a year ago that you were involved in, Vicky, where we did a study to establish the benchmark level of language of students in secondary education in Taiwan. And that really did a massive job for the ministry, who for the first time really had a very clear picture of where their students really were. So you can then really begin to build policy from that. The way benchmarks is used in the Canadian language benchmarks is slightly different. And those are language standards. So basically, those are the setting out of the standards of where people should be at different stages of their English language and other language education. I hope that helps.
Okay, and an interesting question. You mentioned in your plenary around the importance of the alignment of the elements, delivery, curriculum, and assessment, and obviously they involve multiple stakeholders. You mentioned in your plenary from ministry down to the classroom. What practical steps can be taken so that this alignment can actually take place? How do we actually bring all those stakeholders together to ensure that we're on a path to for that alignment to take place? With all these questions around the stakeholders, how they get together?
I think that's a really important question. And I think, to be honest, whoever's asked that question has hit the nail on the head, because in many ways, that's the secret. So you can build beautiful systems and beautiful theories, but if you can't convince the people on the ground that these are going to work and are working, they're never going to support you. So you're always going to have dissatisfaction. One of the failures of many education systems is that they rely on highly technical reports written for experts in the field to demonstrate that their systems work. And they build project plans that are highly complex without ever really going down to the level of the stakeholder and saying, what do you think is important? What do you think? How can I convince you that this is a good idea? So by using focus groups, for example, you can learn what people on the ground are looking for. And then you can build a communication model. Without that communication model, your system is not going to work, I believe. And the communication model takes into account that different stakeholder groups, whether they're learners or parents or teachers or administrators or ministry officials or ministers or university professors, they will need to be communicated with in different ways, using different channels. So, you know, you can bring in a technical expert to write a 150-page report on how wonderful the system is and how well it's working. And that will convince a university professor who will then go on to influence a minister maybe to make a decision. But nobody else is ever going to read it. The minister isn't going to read a 150-page report. So we have to learn how to communicate what we're doing in a way that fits the needs of the stakeholders. And that doesn't happen by chance. So we build a communication plan. That's why the communication model is in there, because we need to talk to people in a way that they understand, not in our way. But it's a great question, it really is.
Thank you very much. And unfortunately, that's all we have time for in terms of questions for your session. Now we'll be having a tea break for the next 15 minutes. The next session after the break will be our second plenary speech of the day by Professor Tony Green from the University of Bedfordshire in England. His plenary will begin at 13:30 Uzbekistan time, which is 10:30 UK time. So please enjoy your tea and coffee, and feel free to continue to talk to your fellow attendees through the chat box. And we'll return at 13:30 Uzbekistan time, 10:30 UK time. Thank you very much. See you very soon, everyone. And thank you, Barry, again. Apologies for the delay, and thank you very much, Professor Anthony Green, for joining us. We are now going to hear our second plenary of the day by Professor Tony or Anthony Green on the topic of washback consequence and policy implementation. Professor Tony Green is Professor in Language Assessment, has also been the Director of the Centre for English Language and Assessment, CRELA, at the University of Bedfordshire in the UK since 2015. Professor Green advised, trained and presented language assessment issues all over the world. He is a president, noise in the background. He's a former president of the International Language Testing Association and an expert member of both major European Language Assessment Associations, EALTA and ALTE. But before I hand over to Professor Green, once again, may I ask everyone to put their microphones on mute? I'll just wait 1 minute so that occurs. Okay, that sounds great, thank you. And also, if you have any questions for Professor Green, please put them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and my colleagues and I will collate them and pass them on to Professor Green at the end of his plenary, when we'll have about 10-15 minutes for questions. Now, over to you, please, Professor Green. Thank you very much. Okay, I can see your screen. I'll go off screen.
Thank you, Vicky. Hi, everybody. I love tests, so I'm going to start this presentation with a quick test for you. Question number 1. Do children in Uzbekistan want to learn English? Do children in Uzbekistan want to learn English? Think about that for a moment. Second question, if your answer to the first question is yes, the second question is, why do children in Uzbekistan want to learn English? Third question, why does the government of Uzbekistan want children to learn English? Was your answer to those questions the same? Do children want to learn English for the same reasons that the government wants them to learn English? If the answers to those questions are different, we have to think about why that is, and if it's possible to have what we were talking about in the first presentation, the comprehensive learning system. Is it possible to have a comprehensive learning system if the reasons why children want to learn English and the reasons why the government wants them to learn English are different? So let's think about some of the reasons why English seems to be so important in the world these days. Well, first of all, there's the issue of trade and doing business around the world. English is becoming the lingua franca for the whole world, but this has some important implications. First of all, the way that native speakers speak the language is becoming less relevant. So it's more likely that you're going to be speaking English to other people who have English as a second or additional language, not to only people from the United States or from Britain or from Australia who are native speakers of the language. That has big implications for the way English is taught and the reasons people have for learning the language. So we're no longer going to be interested in just learning how to read English literature. It's not about learning how to access the works of Arthur Conan Doyle and reading about Sherlock Holmes. It's about being able to communicate effectively with other people who don't necessarily have English as their first language. Second, because of this development, because of the widespread use of English, English is becoming a basic skill in most education systems around the world. Everybody has to learn English in order to be able to get jobs and work in a globalized economy. Now, probably these are not the reasons that are at the top of the minds of the children who are learning the language. They may be more interested in this third reason, which to do is with being able to travel and interact with people around the world. So to become part of the global community, it's important to be able to speak English to other members of that global community. But are students aware enough of what the benefits of speaking English can be? How and why is it important for them in their lives to be able to speak English? Clearly, if the policy is to promote English, it's got to be about more than just education. It's not just a matter of aligning the curriculum and the assessment. It's a matter of aligning the government policy with the understanding that people around the country have of why English might be important for them. But what role does assessment play in all of this? We have a key idea in assessment we call washback. Washback is the influence that tests and assessments have on teaching and learning. And one of the important reasons that children often have for learning English is because they need to pass tests. They don't think of English as being something connected to their lives so much outside the classroom, but they can see that it's something very important for them to get into college or for them to progress and pass all the exams, all the tests that they're given at school. So it's particularly important that we think about how tests and assessments might line up with reasons that the government has and reasons that children might have in their lives outside the classroom for learning languages. So there are three scenarios that we could have with washback and the influence that tests and assessments might have on language learning and on language teaching. One scenario looks like this. We have the kinds of things that people do when they use a language in the real world. So they're using English to do business, they're using English for tourism, they're using English to travel, they're using English to make connections with people around the world. And then the test is just getting them to answer some grammar questions. So in this scenario, There is no overlap between what happens on the test, answering rather strange grammar questions, and what happens in the real world, having to interact with people and communicate with them effectively. And if people are learning for the test, if they're learning to pass the test, the things that they're doing in class are likely to be quite different from the language use in the real world. So there's no connection, there's no overlap between what happens on the test and what happens in the real world. This is a very unfortunate situation because it means people are learning English in ways that are not relevant to the ways that they need to be able to use English when they leave school. More usually we have a situation which looks more like this. There is some overlap between what happens on the test and what happens in real world language use. So some of the things that people do on the test look like things they'll do in the real world. So maybe they're reading emails from friends. Maybe they are reading texts for information that they might be able to use when they're studying through the medium of English, for example. And then when people are studying for the test, some of the things they do will be meaningful and useful for the world beyond the test. But some of the things they're doing for the test will still be a little different. There are still some grammar exercises. Maybe the kinds of texts that they're reading are not so similar to the kind of texts that they'll be reading for the real world. So for example, in an example of one of the tests used in Uzbekistan that I looked at, the reading comprehension passage was on a text written about Sherlock Holmes. And it may be that that kind of text, literary texts, are not really the kinds of texts that children are likely to want to be able to read after they leave school, or at least most of the children. A third scenario might look more like this. If the test tasks come from real world language use that's realistic, the kinds of things that people might expect to do with the language after they leave school, then learning how to carry out those test tasks is likely to mean that you're learning how to do the kinds of things that you'll do after you leave school. So these are useful things, not only for the test, but also for life after the test. But the most we can hope for here is that the test tasks are all similar to things that happen in the real world, but we cannot predict all of the use of language that people will make after they leave school. So there will be many kinds of real world tasks that we can't include in a test, because a test is just a short period of time and can only be a limited selection of tasks. So it won't represent everything that learners might expect to do with a language. But this is the best case scenario, if we can have assessments that really represent the kinds of things that people do outside of school. But even if we have that best case scenario, we know there's still a lot of variation in how people are affected by assessments. Changing the assessment does not automatically lead to people learning in different ways. This is partly because assessments and school results simply matter more to some people than they do to others. Some people are very motivated to succeed at school, other people are not. Which is why it's so important that we involve students' reasons for learning English in the classroom. And we try to encourage them in every way that we can to become motivated to learn the language, not simply to pass tests and assessments. Secondly, some people are better informed about assessments than others. So if people don't know what's on the test, or they have ideas about the test that date back to the test that was given 10 years ago, and they think that's still how it is today, they're not likely to learn most efficiently either for the test or for life after the test. We can also see there are some people who have more belief in the assessments. They share in the government's vision for what the curriculum and learning English and the assessment system should be all about. Other people are not so convinced. So we have some people who are adopters. They love the idea of learning English in new ways. They think the assessments are really good, and they enthusiastically take on the new ideas and adopt them. Other people are not so convinced. They've been teachers for a long time. They know how to teach English. They're not sure about these new ideas, but they're prepared to accept them. And they will change what they do to some extent to work with the new system. We call these people the adapters. Then there's a third group of people who are resistors. They don't agree with the new policy. They don't think this is a better approach to the teaching and learning of English. They don't believe that the new test is an improvement on the old tests, or they really don't want to change their ways. They've been teaching for a long time. They don't really see why they should do things differently now. These people are the resistors. And whatever educational change happens, you will always have some people in each of these three groups. There will always be some people who are enthusiastic, some people who are negative and resist change. So the best case scenario here is that we get more adopters and fewer resistors. We persuade more people that the change is a good thing, and fewer people are resistant to it. They want not to be involved in the change. So what are some of the key issues? Some of the ways that we can really get people to buy into the kinds of changes that we want to introduce? First, we need to make sure that everybody is aware of what the long-term learning goals are. Do we understand, as teachers, as educators, as policymakers responsible for education, do we understand why students want to learn languages? Do we understand what they hope to get from this experience? And can we work with them to improve their motivation? Because if people don't want to learn a language, even if they're learning it to get through a test, they're not going to keep that language beyond the test, which is what our policy, after all, is really about, trying to encourage people to learn languages for the whole of their lives, not just until they get to the end of high school. So do we communicate effectively what our long-term learning goals are? And do we understand well enough what our students' long-term learning goals are? Secondly, we need to think about the design of the test tasks and how they connect to what I'm calling target tasks, the way that we see people using language in the real world after they've taken the test. Thirdly, how important are our assessments for the people involved? Are they important for the teachers? Are they important for the students? And do they connect to their motivations for learning languages? If the tests are too important, they may replace other kinds of motivation. So rather than being enthusiastic about learning English, people may become more enthusiastic about passing tests. And lastly, how much knowledge and what resources do people bring to learning the language and to taking assessments? Are they aware of what they need to be able to do to pass the test or to score high enough for the purposes that they have in mind? What are the success criteria? What do you have to do on the assessment in order to show that you have the knowledge and ability that we want you to develop? So to meet all of these key considerations, we need to collect evidence. We need to have evidence of what happens in the classroom, what motivations students have for learning the language. And if we change anything about the system, what changes does that bring about in the classroom? Can we see that happening? And we need to consider the products. Are we seeing improvements in how well students perform if we make changes to the curriculum, if we make changes to the examination system? Do we really see that things change? And do we have good objective basis for being able to show that things have changed and that people are now learning more English than they were in the past? So as an example of this, if we change the design of university entrance tests, if we change them so that the entrance tests really involve the academic language skills that students need for academic study in English at university, will that change the way that people study language? And will that change their ability to use the language when they actually arrive at university? What evidence can we collect to show that these changes have really taken place? So the idea is that if we change the curriculum, if we understand how well students are motivated to learn the language, and if we change the assessment so that it really reflects the uses of language that the learners can see as realistic and that we can see connect to the use of language they want to make after they leave school, then we will have a better system and people will learn the language more effectively. Does this actually happen in practice? And why does it or why doesn't it happen in practice? I want to share with you an example of a recent test reform effort in Korea, where they invested a lot of money into creating a new test that would better reflect the kinds of language abilities, language skills that people use at universities when they're studying through English. So they introduced a new test called NEET, a NEET new test. And this was based on the Korean National English Curriculum. The old test that they had before was a test largely of grammar and vocabulary. It didn't include any speaking and it included no listening section. So you can imagine in Korean schools, there was a lot of teaching of grammar, not so much teaching of speaking or listening. So they introduced a new test that would be 4 skills. There would be speaking and there would be listening. And the idea behind this was that now in high school, everybody would study speaking and listening. And it was hailed by one of the leading language testing professionals, Lyle Bachman, as a great innovation for Korea that would bring about a great change in the way that English was taught in school. So the new test, the NEET, includes speaking and listening. And the idea is that this will encourage everybody to study speaking and listening. What happened when the new test was introduced? You can see the headline, "Billions blown on NEET." Unfortunately, the Education Ministry there did not think about the whole system. They changed the test, but they didn't invest enough in informing teachers and training teachers to deal with what the new test was asking them to do. So I've put in the box at the bottom here, the problems were participant characteristics and values. Teachers and the students didn't have a clear enough understanding of what the new test was asking of them. And they didn't have the resources they needed to meet the demands of the new test, because the teachers who'd always worked in grammar and vocabulary didn't have the skills to teach speaking and listening. They didn't know what was expected of them, what was needed to get students to the level for the new test. It's also true that the people who were successful on the old test were a little worried by the new test, because they did well under the old system. They weren't so confident they would perform well under the new system. So they became resistors. They didn't want to be involved in this new system. And the result was that the test failed. All of the money it was invested went to waste. So it's a warning that if things are not done in a joined up systematic fashion, then a lot of money can be wasted on expensive, large-scale changes that are never really implemented. In contrast to that, I want to talk about a project that I led in the Russian Federation, where we worked with teachers to develop their assessment literacy. This was in the context of changes to the national matriculation test, the YEGE. And we worked with 11 universities across the Russian Federation with teacher trainers, and we brought them over to the UK and we trained them up in assessment so that they could work then with groups of teachers across the country. And we trained over 50,000 teachers through the course of the project in assessment and how to improve their assessment practices, including how to develop students' speaking abilities in class. And so that meant when the national test introduced speaking, there were trained experts who were able to write good quality test material, and there were trained teachers who were able to develop students' abilities to speak and listen to English. So I want to make 5 suggestions as a conclusion to this presentation. First of all, it's important to think about the motivations for the government and the motivations for the learners themselves, the children who are being asked to learn English, for learning English, and to build local curricula and local tests that meet international standards, but that reflect the motivations and the reasons for using English that are important to Uzbek language learners. Second, it's really important to collect evidence to inform all decision making. So it's seeing what kinds of training teachers need, what learners need to know in order to motivate them to learn English, and how the level of English can be improved over time. All of this has to rest on systematically collecting evidence from classrooms about what is working and what is not working so well, so that improvements can be made. Alongside that, I'd say don't change things too much too soon. It's very popular, of course, with governments to make dramatic changes to systems, to bring in a big radical new system. But those are the kinds of project that tend to fail because too much is done. People feel resistant to it. If small steps are taken, small changes are made. So speaking is introduced into tests, but only as a relatively small part at first. Then teachers slowly get up to speed in being able to deal with speaking. If a complete test of speaking is brought in overnight, teachers who have no experience of doing this in the past will resist it. So if small changes are made and they're seen to work, people are more willing to take on the bigger changes when they come. So continuous improvements are better than massive across the board changes that may not stand the test of time. That means it's also very important, as I'm suggesting in number 4 here, to involve as many people as possible in a reform process. Teachers have to be trained up, but they also have to be listened to. And the same with learners and parents. Understand what brings them to want children to learn English, as well as what the policy might dictate. And don't overestimate how much power tests can have to change things for the better. Everything has to be done as part of an overall system. Tests by themselves will not encourage people to change their behavior in positive ways. And lastly, and perhaps most importantly, it's the importance of training. Assessment is never given enough attention in teacher training. And that means that teachers tend to fall back on their own experiences of assessment when they were students, which was not always a positive experience and was certainly a very conservative experience. So if we want to bring in change, we have to make sure that the teachers particularly are trained to manage that change and trained in ways that they can develop their own assessments in the classroom, but also understand how best to work with the external assessments, the new tests that we want to use in the system as well. Okay, that brings me to the end of my presentation, and now I think we have a little bit of time left for some questions.
Thank you very much, Professor Green. We do indeed have around 15 minutes for questions, and I've been sent quite a few interesting ones. I'm going to start with a practical one, if I may. I have a question sent in. I'll read it. It says that you mentioned the need to have test tasks that represent what students do in the real world. Can you give us some actual examples of what you mean by that, please?
So one area that tends to be important in national testing systems is using English for academic study. So when students go on to study at university, they will need to listen to lectures in English, take notes, and then write essays about the lecture that they've heard. So in a test, we can replicate that kind of cycle. So rather than simply having students write an essay on a topic that we give them, we can provide them with a short lecture, which they listen to. They have to take notes as they're listening to that lecture. And then they have to write a summary or write an essay about the lecture that they've heard. So that would be an example of a test task that is closer to the kinds of things that students might need to do in the real world. Or if we were thinking about a business context, sorts of things that students might need to do if they're working in a business would be to participate in meetings. So rather than testing speaking by having students give a speech on a prepared topic, we might put them into a meeting with 2 or 3 other students and have them discuss a topic and reach an agreement about that topic. So it would be a little bit like having a negotiation in a business context. And that will give us a much better and clearer picture of whether they're able to negotiate and interact with other users of the language than if we simply interview them with a teacher asking them questions and them answering the questions. I hope those are 2 practical examples.
Thank you very much. And an interesting question has also just come in. You mentioned the importance, obviously, of washback. That's the topic of your talk. In Uzbekistan, very rarely they have speaking tests. What is your view on the importance of including speaking in tests?
This comes back to what it is that the children and the government want to learn English for. If you want to learn English so that you can read literature, then reading in the classroom is a great idea. But if you want to learn English so that you're able to speak to people, then it's essential that speaking has to happen in the classroom. And if speaking is not happening on the test, it's much less likely to happen or to be given importance in the classroom. So it is really important, it's essential that there should be tests that involve speaking if you want people to develop speaking abilities. But I would remind you as well as of my kind of caution around that, is that if you try to introduce speaking as the most important skill overnight, then you may find that teachers are not ready to do that, that students haven't learned enough about how to speak in the classroom up to now, and so they'll be scared of tests of speaking. So I would introduce it in steps, a little bit at a time, and give it increasingly more importance over time until people are more comfortable with that being part of the national testing system. But yes, eventually it has to be there, or you're not going to end up with students who can speak English.
Okay, thank you very much. And just a quick question. I've been asked to put the question to you. Could you explain the difference between testing and assessment? You use both in your plenary.
Yeah, so tests, we're very familiar to everyone that they are set procedures for finding evidence about how much of, in this case, English, people know. So there are rules around everybody has to sit a certain distance apart from other people, or they have to sit with a certain number of people around a table and have a discussion. It's timed, there's a fixed number of questions. So tests are a very specific kind of assessment. But there are lots of other ways of collecting evidence of how much language people know. You could simply follow them around and watch them, or you can give them just regular exercises to do in the classroom and observe what they're doing, or check their results later. So a wide range of things are included in assessment, but tests are a very particular standard fixed way of doing assessment.
Okay, and quite a difficult question has just come in. You mentioned the importance of stakeholders buying into this concept, encouraging people not to obviously resist, but be adopters. What practical steps can we take with stakeholders who are important in this process to encourage them to accept these changes to improve the test tasks and target task alignment?
I think this is one of those answers that you have to repeat 3 times. So it's communication, communication, and communication. So it's finding ways to talk to and engage stakeholders of all kinds in the planned changes, which means could be things like holding focus groups. It could be information sessions. It's of course going to be things like having websites and producing publicity material, but it also involves, it has to be two-way. You have to find out from them how much they know already, how ready they are to accept new and different ways of doing things, as well as telling them about the new system. And then persuading them that this is a better way of doing things, but maybe also adjusting things to take account of what they might tell you when you communicate with them. So communication of one kind or another is the way to do it.
And a question just in, some students are obviously very motivated to learn languages, others aren't. How can you sort of encourage those children to be more motivated? You mentioned in your plenary about bringing in into the classroom, I suppose, tasks that the students themselves wish to learn English for. What do you mean by that, and how would that actually encourage motivation?
Well, part of globalization is that people want to communicate with people in other countries who have similar interests to them. So it's finding out what the students' interests are and involving them maybe then in communicating with other English language learners around the world who are interested in the same things as they are. So they can build a wider network of friends by using English to communicate than they can if they're only able to communicate in Uzbek, for example. So it's trying to take the things that students are interested in and the ways in which they use language in their everyday lives, and showing how English can help them in those spheres. So if they're interested in computer games, they can communicate with other children around the world who are interested in communicating in the same computer games using English. And that can be brought into the classroom. If they're interested in sports, you can find a lot of information about whatever sport they may be interested in English and bring that into the classroom. So it's trying to engage the sorts of ways that they can see themselves using English outside the classroom and making a bridge between what happens in the classroom with that. Now, I'm not suggesting that we should completely change the English class so that we're focusing on learning how to do computer games in English. That would not be sensible. But it's bringing an element of that in that is motivating for the learners, but also pointing to the future. So bringing in people who've learned English and are using English now in their jobs in ways that they hadn't expected when they were at school, and having them communicate to the students why English is so important to them in their lives. And if you can bring enough of that in, it does help to motivate the students. It won't motivate all of them. You're never going to motivate everybody to learn a language, but the little we can do to improve that connection with what happens in their real life, so they can see that what's happening in the class has some use for them when they leave school, they're more likely to be motivated to learn the language than if it's just for passing tests.
Okay, thank you very much. And another question for you. You mentioned, I'll just quickly read it, apologies. You mentioned that in one of your final 5 suggestions around the importance of teacher training. Can you elaborate on what type of training that you mean?
Okay, so what happens at the moment in most teacher training is that assessment is either an optional part of the training, or it's put right at the end of the training course. And you'll see this in international schemes like the CELTA and the Delta from Cambridge, that assessment is optional for Delta and it's hardly even part of CELTA. But about a quarter, at least a quarter actually, of everything that teachers do in the classroom is connected to assessment. I mean assessment in this broad sense of trying to find out what the learners are able to do already using the language and whether they've learned what it is that we've taught them. So if teachers are not taught effective techniques for keeping track of what their students are learning, they're not likely to be as effective as they could be as teachers. So it's going to involve things like training students in self and peer assessment, helping students to understand success criteria. So what is the teacher looking for in their work that would show that they've been successful as learners of language skills? And perhaps most importantly, how we manage feedback in the classroom. So what information should we be giving back to students about how well they've performed and about how they can improve their performance and improve their learning of the language? So those kind of classroom assessment skills need to be taught more effectively than they ever have been. And because we're saying that tests are so important to a lot of learners and important to their life chances, it's understanding how to best integrate what happens on tests with what happens in classrooms. So when we're preparing students to take tests, what sort of messages are we giving them about the test? And what's the best way of preparing them to be successful on the test without making them give up learning English the day after they take the test, which happens all too often.
Okay, and the final question, sorry, please finish, Professor Green.
No, go on. I had finished.
Final question is coming from 2 parts. I'm looking at the chat, and a lot of our attendees are talking about the importance of speaking, and we have also viewers looking at YouTube as we're streaming this conference as well, as our platform is now full for our attendees. And one of the questions from our YouTube viewer is around the how long does it take to establish speaking in the classes and in exams? Because you mentioned before, we must do this gradually. We can't impose it straight away. But what's your view on it, to start looking at speaking within the Uzbekistan context, just the importance of speaking for the outside of the classroom world?
Yeah, so I've said that it's good to introduce these things in small steps. So I think tomorrow you could introduce an element of speaking, but you think that students who enter school come in with no great expectations, no particular knowledge of what's going to happen when they arrive in school. So every new group of students comes in fresh and will accept what it is that they're given. So if teachers are trained up, as a new group of students come in, once that group has gone through the school system, they will be ready to take the full speaking test. But the group who are there now, who are 1 year away from taking their final exams, if they haven't already had a lot of experience of speaking, and they're suddenly told that a quarter of your score is going to depend on speaking, they're likely to be scared by that, not feel fully prepared for it. So it might be a mistake to go in with a very large scale speaking test with that group of students. But you could include a small element there, just to seed the idea that speaking is coming through the system. So I would suggest that you would plan for introducing speaking tests at a point when new entrants to the school system reach the point where they're going to be taking the exams.
Okay.
So if that's a period of 4 or 5 years, then I would build up the speaking test over those 4 or 5 years, so that when that cohort comes through, the teachers have got the experience of teaching them speaking all the way through the school system, and then they're ready to take the speaking test. So that sort of timescale.
Okay, thank you very much. And unfortunately, that's all the questions we have time for. Would like to thank you very much for your very interesting plenary. And we're now going to move on to our next session. Thank you, Professor Green.
Okay, thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Now we're going to move on to hear from Yaira Abdulraimova on the topic of National Pre-Service Teacher Education and Training. Yaira is a self-directed, action-orientated EFL teacher with over 21 years experience in education. She is a co-author of a number of books on English language teaching, and she is a head of department at Uzbek State World Languages University. She's also been involved in British Council projects and is experienced in developing curriculum as well as conducting teacher training. Now, before I hand over to Yaira, can I please ask everyone again to put your questions into the Q&A? We will collect them. We will have about 5 minutes at the end of this session for question and answers. So over to you, Yaira.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So in this presentation, I will be speaking on behalf of all preset teachers of Uzbekistan, because we have thousands of teachers who work at higher education and then who teach according to preset curriculum. And then I will be speaking about the role of assessment in pre-service teacher education and training. The starting point of preset program goes to 2008, when there was a demand for new teacher education institution or the program. And the policy environment increasingly demanded changes in the teacher education programs that prepare specialists who are competent both in language and language teaching. The Ministry of Higher Education of Uzbekistan and the British Council developed a new pre-service teacher training program for future teachers of English. We call it like preset program. And the objectives of the program is to equip students of higher education with the skills and competences that would enable them to teach English using contemporary approaches. Okay. Yes. Okay. And the purpose of this this was an English reform project, And the purpose of this English reform project is to achieve lasting improvement in the standards of English language teaching in Uzbekistan by enhancing learning experience of ELT preset students and by setting clear exit standards in language referred to international standards. Before the preset curriculum or the preset reform project was introduced, of course, there was another curriculum that the whole country used or they conducted their courses according to that curriculum, especially at preset institutions. But mostly those courses or that curriculum focused on developing or improving students or future teachers' language proficiency. But we know that being a good teacher, to be a good teacher, a professional teacher, being proficient in language is not enough. But at the same time, our students or future teachers should be competent in teaching language. And the key partners were Ministry of Higher and Specialized Education, British Council, Nile, and then 17 preset institutions. So these 17 preset institutions were involved in this project. The preset curriculum is derived from recent models in use in the UK and Europe. And then the main aims are to teach students to use the language and to gain practical pedagogical skills. And the target level, I mean, by the end of this program, students should achieve C1 level. So it means that even if it's a preset where future teachers of English are prepared, trained, the program does not ignore language courses also. And in order to just meet the two demands, like preparing both good language learners and then also proficient language teachers, two new core models came. These are methodology and language learning models. You may just ask, what was wrong with the first or the preset curriculum? We can say that maybe it was also good. We studied according to that curriculum. But as I have mentioned, that it mostly focused on language proficiency, and then methodology or teaching skills somehow were not supported. And only in year 3, I mean, students attended methodology courses. If we look at this table, we can see that in the first column, you can see preset curriculum subjects or the courses. And then in the third one, you can see the preset models. In year 1, students mostly attended practical English, practical grammar, and then lexicology. It wasn't neglected or it wasn't omitted from the standards, but these subjects, these courses were improved. And then here we have more language courses that help students to achieve C1 level by the end of this 4-year curriculum. But in year 2, the former curriculum still focused on language skills, but in new one, in preset curriculum, methodology courses, practical methodology courses were introduced. Together with language models, students learned or attended language learning, teaching language system, and approach to teaching models. So together with language, they improved their or learned about language teaching. Only in year 3, methodology was introduced in the form of lecture and seminar in the former curriculum. And this was very interesting course. I mean, students learned a lot, but it was a lecture and then seminar. And then the hours of this course wasn't enough to be professional teachers. And in year 3, more language teaching courses were included or presented, introduced in preset curriculum. By year 4, students attend more teaching courses than language, because by year 4, they have enough courses on language learning or language classes. And that's why the preset curriculum thinks that, the project thinks that it is like enough just to, or they should have like higher level of English courses, and then where they do research or they improve their research skills. And instead of just practical English, they was introduced research writing course, and the rest are only about teaching. So what are the key changes in the curriculum? So there is a balance between language learning and methodology training. English as medium of instruction. So English is not used only to practice language, but also to attend methodology courses, and then practice-based methodology rather than lecture-based, and reference to international standards in English. Modern approach to teaching and learning were introduced. Independent learning skills. Students didn't only rely on teachers, but they were introduced, different assignments and then assessment that could develop autonomous learners and then become more independent learners. And research skills. And the last point is very important. New assessment approaches and clear assessment specifications were introduced. So let's look at examples of assessment types. We know that there is a cycle. Teaching, we say curriculum, teaching, and assessment. They cannot come separately, but they are all linked. And then this is a cycle, always. If we just change the content of the course, it's not enough just to expect the professional, to prepare professional teachers, but the assessment also should be changed. Let's just look at some examples of assessment types that were practiced in the former curriculum. For example, students read the text and then they translate it, transcribe the words, and then transcribe the sentences, mark the stress and tunes, or read the text aloud and retell the text word by word. Prepared speeches were presented. Even they recited dialects in pairs, word by word. And then they were question and answer tasks as assessment. But the questions mostly were on theory of language. And then spelling dictations, grammar exercise, and product-oriented essay. I belong to this generation. I also practiced all these assignments as assessment. And then, for example, I also just learned by heart the texts that were given. Word by word, we had to retell. Maybe it was good for vocabulary, to enrich vocabulary. But now, after like graduating from the university, I don't remember enough the text by heart, and then I cannot just retell it word by word. Maybe I can just remember some words or the names from the text, for example, dialects like Comrade Petrov or Comrade Ivanov, etc. Or maybe just some meaning, but I cannot just recite them or retell them word by word. And there isn't kind of process-based assessment. So that's why there was a demand not only to change the curriculum or the content of the course, but at the same time to change or to improve the assessment. Because there is a link between curriculum, teaching, and assessment. So the curriculum is designed, and then we just choose or use different methods, approaches, and then the course books, etc. We just choose according to the methods that we use in our teaching. And then, of course, there is assessment. In order to see the result of the product or the achievement, there must be assessment. And that's why all this like curriculum and teaching and an assessment were considered while launching this program or new curriculum. And key project products are curriculum of year bachelor program and syllabi for 30 modules, both language and then teaching modules, methodology modules. And assessment profiles and assessment specifications were presented. And I should say that this syllabi and then assessment profiles and assessment specifications were created, designed by local teachers considering the local context. So what our students need, what our students, like preset students, need in the future when they go to schools, when they start teaching English at schools or lyceums. And considering the local context, all these documents were designed and prepared. Now, I would like just to show, here you can just see some examples of assessment that you can find in preset curriculum. For example, we have like more than this list, but some of them are presented here. For language models, students make presentations, they work in groups to present their projects, and then they write critical report on feature articles from newspaper and magazines, or article discussions, debates, role plays, roundtable discussions, etc. And all these are more formative assessment rather than summative. Students practice this list of assignments as activities or tasks, but at the same time, teachers use these assignments as assessment for assessing. And then all of them are, many of them, we can say, can be used as formative and then summative. And then methodology models, article report, reflective essay they write. So they read professional articles and then they should write a report, or design lesson observation form. They should write lesson plans or lesson plan evaluation, case study on materials adaptation, etc., and developing assessment criteria, analytical report, and on analyzed test. So these assignments are some examples of different methodology models. And in order to prepare, while preparing, getting ready for this presentation, I decided to just conduct informal survey among second-year students. And then 127 students replied. And then the question was like what they enjoy doing, and then what are the beneficial assessment assignments or the tasks that they like, and then they enjoy doing. So this is the results. Actually, students had chance to choose multiple options. So that's why we don't come from 100 here %. But for example, you can see that they 30% out of 127, they like reading logs, group presentations, 45%, etc. And this shows that students like the assessments that are presented in preset curriculum. And then every time when we observe students, students enjoy being involved in formative assessment when they receive feedback from teachers, from their peers, or when they conduct self-assessment, etc. So why the assessment is important in preset curriculum? Our students are future teachers. We know that teachers teach according how they were taught. It means that what they observe in the classroom or in the lesson, during the lesson, they remember, if they like, if they enjoy, if it's like it gives like beneficial backlash, then they apply or they use these assignments in their teaching. So that's why our students are not just assessed, but also they practice the assessment as learners and also as teachers. Let's look at one just example from the assessment. Here, critical response to an online article or blog. Students should go to online sites or blogs and then they should read the article and in the blog or on a website, and then they should read and then they respond to this online article or blog. And then the following bullet points are given in the specifications. So it's not just reading and answering the question, but they should read, understand, and then using their like knowledge from the classroom or in the classroom from the model, they should just respond critically to this online article. Or another one can be a ready-made lesson plan evaluation. So they should find a ready lesson plan from the suggested sites or from other sites or from different professional magazines. And then they should answer these questions to evaluate this lesson plan. So this assessment specification comes from methodology model. And as you see, that assessment that is presented in preset curriculum has long-term goal. It means that students do not just practice assessment, but they learn this assessment, or they practice this assessment for their future profession, for their future work. And they are like real life tasks, assignments. They do not just read this lesson plan and then answer the questions, right? But they should analyze that they will come across in real life situation when they start teaching. And then assessment principles for preset models are, there are huge varieties of assessment types practiced during 4 years throughout preset models. Knowledge, skill, and competence are assessed through different assessment types. Linguistic as well as communicative competence and teaching skills are assessed. Preset assessment is selective. It covers all the items that have been taught or studied. And all preset assessment is based on clear criteria which are balanced and transparent. In all assessment specifications, we can find clearly described or the criteria, and then they are all transparent. By being familiar with the criteria, students can learn also how to design their own criteria for their own assessment in future. And from the examples, from above mentioned examples, we of the list of assessment types, we can say that preset curriculum assessment is more formative rather than summative, which means it recommends teachers to provide short-term feedback in all cases. So these assignments help students or future teachers to form the skills both in language and then teaching. So it's not like summative that demands only product from the students that was before the new curriculum introduced. But students are mostly involved in informal feedback, formal feedback, and then formative feedback, summative feedback, student peer feedback, and student self-feedback. And in every course, for example, if they write essay, if they are asked to write essay, first they have like peer feedback, and then they have teacher feedback. That is, this can be like informal and then formal, and then they will submit the final version or the draft of their essay. It means that the assignments that are focused on process rather than product help the learners to build their skills or to improve their skills. And then we can be sure that almost all the assignments help students to improve their language skills, even if they are methodology-based assignments, but still they use English as a mode. And that's why we shouldn't say that by year 4, students are not practicing enough language, but they are practicing their language through methodology courses and then assessment types. And as our students are preset students, they should know about assessment. We know that teachers should have assessment literacy. Assessment literacy. Okay, so when students learn about when do students learn about assessment? In year 4, there is a module or the course, language testing and assessment, that has like 44 hours. In this course, students practice or develop their assessment literacy, improve their assessment literacy. And the course objectives is, by the end of this course, students be aware of basic principles of language assessment, be aware of different types of language tests, analyze the appropriateness of alternative ways of assessment to certain teaching contexts, be aware of different types of continuous assessment, and be able to design assessment tools and plan assessment procedure. So PIN, according to PIN, assessment literacy is classified according to these 5 levels: illiteracy, nominal literacy, functional literacy, procedural and conceptual literacy, and multidimensional literacy. If we look at the course content or the objectives of this language testing and assessment module, we can say that if students go through this procedure or go through the whole preset curriculum, they at least can reach the third level of this classification. But the course, language testing and assessment course, aims like helping students to be at the 4th level, that is procedural and conceptual literacy, where students understand central concepts of the field and using knowledge in practice. So from these objectives, we can say that by the end of year 4, students practice different assessment types. They are like not traditional, but they are alternative and authentic assessment tasks or the types, and they achieve the 4th level of classification, assessment literacy classification. We can say that assessment is important in preset curriculum because our students are future teachers. Again, I'm just mentioning it. They learn from the process, and then they acquire these skills and then the knowledge, and then they apply in their teaching. Of course, you may say that, is it like kind of perfect procedure that you apply, or they use this assessment, and then do all teachers enjoy? Are all teachers motivated to use this formative assessment or all these assessment types? Do students like? Are there any challenges? Of course, yes, there are some challenges, but about the challenges, we will speak in the plenary later. And at the end, I would like to say that we believe that students should be taught English for better communication and not just to pass the test. The purpose of assessment should have communicative purpose. Students, when they, and then also learning or teaching purpose. From the list from the list that I have just given about, you can see that students do not only just have like memorization tasks, or they do not just learn by heart or translate, etc., but they learn from these assessments and then improve their communicative competence. And this is the underlying principle of contemporary language teaching and the fundamental philosophy of the whole preset program. So I think that's it. Am I too fast?
No, thank you very much, Yara.
Okay. Thank you.
for a few questions, if that's okay. Just one clarification question from someone from the audience. Can you just quickly explain the difference between language module and methodology module, please?
Okay, yes. Language models means where students practice language. They learn or they practice grammar, vocabulary in context. They practice their or improve their speaking skills, listening skills, reading, where they improve their language proficiency. But methodology models are the ones that help the preset students to be professional teachers. So these models are all about teaching. For example, they learn how to design tests, they learn how to design lesson plans, they learn about the methods of teaching, etc. So these are methodology models.
Okay, thank you very much. Unfortunately, we've run out of time, but would like to thank you very much, Yaira, for your very interesting talk around. Okay, thank you very much. Now, in our final session for today, I'd like to pass you on to Professor Barry O'Sullivan, who will be chairing our first panel session of the conference. The panel session is entitled From Policy to Implementation in Uzbekistan. And once again, before I pass you to Professor O'Sullivan, please remember to put your questions in the Q&A section, because we will have about 25 to 30 minutes after the initial presentations in the panel to answer these questions. So over to you, Professor O'Sullivan.
Yes, I am unable to start my camera because the host has stopped it. So you have to,
Saeed. Yeah.
just have to listen to me for a moment.
1 second. I'll just contact Amir Saeed and get
my video.
There you go, Professor.
Okay, well, that was a really interesting morning, I felt. We had some really fascinating insights from Yaria and from Tony, and I hope I contributed a little myself. But now I think this is the part of the day when things begin to get serious, because we have got to think, you know, we've talked about theory, and we've talked about the application of theory, and then we've talked about what really happens in a system, and now we have to think about the policy and how we move from all of these ideas and these theories into policy. And for this, we have what I think you would find a very interesting group of people. And because my Uzbek is not to be well, it can be frowned upon, I'm sure, if I start to try to pronounce people's name. I'm going to ask each of the participants to very, very briefly introduce themselves. And I think I'll start with Yaria. She's just finished, so she doesn't need much. And then you can hand on, Yaria.
Good afternoon and morning again. So I'm Yaira Abdurrahimova. I work at World Language University in Tashkent.
Thank you. Now, Ralph, you just popped up on my screen.
Hi, yeah, I'm Ralph. I'm the director of the British Council in Taiwan.
Hello, I'm Svetlana Khan, and I work at the Agency for Promoting Foreign Language Learning in Uzbekistan.
Thank you, Svetlana. So I'm going to be the chair and moderator, but we're first going to hear from each of the individual presenters, and then we'll take some questions. So. And Sardar has arrived.
Good morning and good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Sardar. How are you?
I'm fine. Do I need to introduce myself too?
Just a very quick Few words.
Yeah, my name is Sardor Rajabov. I'm a Deputy Director of State Test Center under the Cabinet of Ministers of Republic of Uzbekistan.
Thank you. So we'll start with Ralph Rogers, who's going to talk to us a little bit about some of the work he's been doing, the really interesting work he's been doing in Taiwan recently.
Okay, well, let me attempt to share my screen and see if I can. Okay, so can everyone see that? It says evidence-based decisions to support better language policy.
Not yet.
Not yet, okay. Let me know if that pops up on the screen.
Yes, finally we have something happening.
Okay.
But not quite fully yet, but something is happening.
It says I'm screen sharing.
Yes, there seems, it may be, we have a slight delay, but it is working now.
Okay, so the slides aren't essential anyway. I'm going to be talking about some of the work, how we've been supporting the Ministry of Education in Taiwan to take an evidence-based approach to language policy and how that's been helping them to deliver better learning outcomes. So Taiwan has a policy called the Bilingual 2030 policy, where they aim to become bilingual in Chinese and English by 2030. The policy was first announced at the end of 2018, but it only really picked up speed and momentum in January 2020, when President Tsai Ing-wen was elected to her second term, and the bilingual policy then became a pillar of her one of her new administration's policies. It's aimed to boost the competitiveness of Taiwan's young people and help them to get better job opportunities and higher salaries through the cultivation of English proficiency. However, the development and implementation of that policy in Taiwan faced a number of significant challenges. But one of the first challenges was the lack of data, the lack of evidence they had on which to develop appropriate policy interventions. And as we all know, our ability to identify the best way to get from A to B, from where we are now to where we want to be, is only as good as our ability to assess points A and B, to understand where we are now, to determine where we want to get to, and then to figure out the best route between the two. But the ministry lacked data about the current levels of English proficiency of students in basic education, and particularly the data around the proficiency of their productive skills of speaking and writing. And they very quickly realized that in order to set realistic targets and to develop appropriate interventions to realize those targets, and to get the all-important stakeholder buy-in necessary to successfully implement those interventions, the very first step they'd need to take would be to determine the current levels of English proficiency across all 4 skills within their 12-year basic education system. And to that end, they commissioned the British Council to conduct a baseline study to do just that, to evaluate the English language proficiency of students in both grade 9, which is the 14 to 15-year-olds, and grade 12, the 17 to 18-year-olds, across the whole of Taiwan. So we helped the Ministry of Education get this data by measuring the current ability of a targeted sample of the school population in Taiwan. 6,000 students at over 400 schools were sampled in a double-blind sample, and the resulting data provided the ministry with incredibly valuable evidence to support their policy making. For example, the ministry now know that the overall English level of more than 20% of grade 12 students has reached the B2 CEFR level. But it also showed them that there was considerable unevenness of performance across the 4 skills of listening, speaking, reading, and writing. In particular, students performed far better in the receptive skills of reading and listening than the productive skills of writing and speaking. And this evidence has directly informed the ministry's policy making. For example, it informed their new £454 million 10-year policy into developing English medium education in higher education, what they call the bilingual program, bilingual education for students in college, or BEST, their BEST policy. And from the evidence that we were able to gather through the baseline study for the ministry, they now know, as I said earlier, that more than 20% of students about to enter higher education have the basic ability to take courses that are fully conducted in English. But it was also clear to the Ministry of Education that the #1 priority for Tier students is to substantially improve their speaking and writing skills in order to successfully participate in courses fully conducted in English. Another body of evidence that informed their thinking around this project, the English Medium Instruction in Higher Education project, or BEST policy, was the research that they commissioned to evaluate the current plans of higher education institutions in Taiwan to cultivate the English proficiency of their students. The ministry's SPROUT project, or Sustained Progress and Rise of Universities in Taiwan, is a £2.3 billion initiative to drive up the quality and internationalization of higher education over the 5-year period, 2018 to 2022. And one of the KPIs that the participating institutions had to meet was improving the English proficiency of their students. And at the midpoint of that implementation of this policy, the British Council asked, the ministry asked the British Council to help evaluate the plans for the second phase of implementation of that policy against that specific KPI around driving up English proficiency. So that to that end, we conducted a piece of research and were able to provide the Ministry of Education with valuable data to base their future policy decisions. We surveyed around 14,000 students, over 200 instructors, as well as conducting more than, well, we had 30 focus groups and 30 separate classroom observations. And through that, we were able to identify the strengths, the weaknesses, the opportunities, and the challenges around student motivation, the classroom experience, the experience beyond the classroom, assessment and strategic alignment, the course and teacher evaluation, and institutional and structural obstacles. So as a result of gathering evidence to inform their decisions, the Ministry of Education have now been able to make evidence-based policy decisions that we believe will deliver much better learning outcomes. Just a few examples. As a result of the findings in the SPROUT research, the Ministry have now been able to provide higher education institutions in Taiwan with much more targeted support. They've also been able to adopt a much more holistic approach to cultivating English proficiency, and are now taking important steps to align the curriculum with the delivery of that curriculum and the assessment of that curriculum. For example, they've recently commissioned the development of a common framework of reference for Taiwan, which will bring local teaching, learning, assessment into closer interaction with one another, as well as facilitating smoother interchanges with international suppliers, teacher training, classroom materials, and assessments. They've also commissioned the development of a 4 skills test for university students. And by including the productive as well as receptive skills in that summative assessment, they will ensure that the learning system in Taiwan moves towards a much more communicative oriented approach. So to briefly summarize, let me quote from the Deputy Minister responsible for higher education, Deputy Minister Liu Mengqi, who said, "What we have learned from the report will become the basic pillars for us to promote bilingual education and improve the English proficiency of our students." Thank you very much.
Barry, you may be on mute. We can't hear you. Apologies.
You were right. I was on mute, and that's why you couldn't hear me, because I regularly do that kind of thing. But let's move along now, and we have our second presenter, Svetlana Khan.
Okay, thank you. And I'd like to ask Amir Said to help me with the demonstration of my slides, if possible. Amir Said?
Sure, just a second.
Yeah, thank you. So while the slides are coming, first of all, I'd like to greet all, and I'd like to thank British Council, Tashkent, for organizing this event and for giving me a chance to talk to you all and to discuss these important issues in our educational system and to see how we can move from policy to implementation. And I've decided to build up my presentation around some concerns expressed by our partners and discuss and see the challenges we have and where we can go and what can be done to solve the problems we have. Amir Said.
Yes, it is going, Svetlana. Technical issues. Just a second, please.
Thank you. So, of course, this is not the whole list of concerns we collected and Wiki shared with us, but I've picked some of them to discuss with you. So the first concern, we will see on the slide when it comes, but because it is not yet there, I will read out. So due to existing demand and supply, it has become a tradition to memorize a part of foreign language only for tests. Although our students pass the test, they cannot speak or listen. So, and we must admit that this fact is not a feature of one particular segment of education. It's a problem from which not only school children and students at the university suffer, but teachers as well. For example, the main concern teachers express when we discuss teacher training courses, regular state teacher training courses, they complain about a huge mismatch between the content of the courses they go through and, yeah, thank you very much. And final test they must take in order to get the certificate of completion. Can we go to another, to the second slide? Can you say it? Yeah, thank you. So I'm talking about the first one. And so Washback Effect is, which discussed by Anthony Green, and he gave a great presentation with lots of suggestions we can take, is also, I think, an answer to the question why students cannot speak and why our students have very poor listening skills. So in the baseline study we did with the British Council, we saw lots of examples when we saw that teachers and pupils are like involved in grammar and preparation for tests, and so they mostly learn grammar and they learn the questions and answers to get ready to entrance exams. And the solution to this concern can lie in changing university entrance exams. And this is one of the urgent goals we hope to achieve in the nearest future. But as Anthony Green, in his very interesting presentation, he raised a question, will it really change language learning or not? So we should think about this, and we should take all precaution steps in order to achieve this goal if we introduce this finally. Concern number 2 is related to the first concern, particularly in the area of obsession of grammar learning. And again, another baseline study we did together with the British Council showed that most final exams in the universities, we looked at how teachers develop their syllabi, what materials they use, we observed lessons and so on. We talked to teachers and head teachers and to students. And we discovered again the same mismatch. So between the content and the final exams, usually final tests contain only reading text for reading and translation, and then answering the questions. And so another task is make up a story on a given topic. And there is a concern also that there is no national system for determining the methodology or pedagogical skills of foreign language teachers. And obviously, this is a big task for us, and we must work together with all stakeholders in order to develop this and to use it in our educational system. So if we move to solutions, can we look at another? Yes, solutions. So we cannot say that we have already ready-made solutions and answers to our problems and concerns expressed, but we can look and discuss some of them. And again, looking back at the presentation done by Anthony Green, he made a list of 5 suggestions, and I found them very practical and useful. And we, with all stakeholders, must look at them carefully and take on, of course, with this adapt or consider. And it is obvious that building local capacity is a must for our country. And our agency is promoting master's courses which are very focused and which will, like master courses, not for general philology or lexicology, but master courses which will prepare specialists for development of curriculum, syllabi, material design, and assessment specialists as well. And we hope that these specialists then will move things and will raise teachers' level of English and teaching pedagogy. And the last not the least, so different aspects of reform are done in isolation and little coordination. Yes, and we strongly believe that this can be, or it is, one of the key solutions to all challenges and problems we have. So we believe that without coordination and cooperation of all stakeholders, we won't be able to achieve much. And our mission is to coordinate all efforts and all the work which different agencies are doing in the field of foreign language learning. And we work closely with all 3 ministries in Uzbekistan, and with the help of our agency representatives, we have representatives in all regions of Uzbekistan. We are trying to reach all teachers in the country, in all schools. And we hope that together with all who are involved in this sphere, we will achieve our goals, and we will establish fruitful and mutually beneficial cooperation. And we are very open to all ideas, all possible projects.
Thank you very much. Sorry, I'm just trying to keep time. Very interesting.
Yes, I think that's it. Yeah,
lovely.
This is
Thank you very much.
Yeah, and as I said, we are open to all ideas, and we are ready to cooperate with all stakeholders.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Svetlana. And now we're moving on to Sardar.
Okay.
Good morning and good afternoon once again. Just I will share. Could you see the slide?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay. Good morning and good afternoon once again, participants of the conference. Today's my speech will be about policy change in language teaching and assessment in Uzbekistan. The State Test Center is considered one of the policy-making bodies in the field of educational assessment in Uzbekistan. It's also the only body which implements the state policy on selection for public higher education institutions. Every year, State Test Center delivers over 2 million exams, among which are university admission examinations, pre-selection to presidential schools, language proficiency tests, and many others. State Test Center has taken part in the preparation of several presidential decrees and other policy documents since it was established. Among them, there are documents that play a great role in the promotion of teaching and learning foreign languages. One of the most important of such policy documents is the Presidential Decree number 1875 on measures to further improve learning foreign languages, adopted in 2012. This decree brought about drastic changes in teaching and learning foreign languages, especially by implementing CFR system in teaching and assessment. In 2013, Department of Foreign Language Assessment was established, and the State Test Center began to deliver tests to assess language proficiency of general public and especially in service teachers. In this department, we designed national language proficiency tests based on CFR. Another important step taken in 2019 to improve foreign language learning is the recognition of national and international foreign language proficiency certificates in admission to higher education institutions. Certificates equal to level B2 or higher of CFR are recognized in admission to higher education. Those certificates holders will be exempt from taking foreign language block in admission exams and given the maximum point. Unlike foreign language block in admission exams, which consist of grammar and some reading items, language proficiency tests assess full range of language skills and can give detailed information about the applicant's knowledge and ability. This can stimulate the learner to develop all the four language skills together instead of having rudimentary knowledge on grammar and reading. Just earlier this year, another presidential decree to promote foreign language learning has been passed. Now, foreign language teachers holding national or international foreign language proficiency certificates equal to C1 or higher of CFR will be entitled to monthly bonuses in the amount of 50% of their base salaries. This is also a great incentive to teach foreign language better. As I mentioned above, assessment of in-service foreign language teachers began in 2013. Full range of language skills are assessed in the examination, including listening, reading, writing, speaking, as well as grammar and vocabulary. Exams are delivered twice a year, and it's free for those who are taking the test once every 3-year period. Those who pass this test will be eligible to 15 to 30% bonuses to their monthly salaries. The document will be valid for 3 years. Since the exam was established, STC tests more than 100,000 foreign language teachers in 14 languages, and there is evident positive change in the foreign language proficiency level of those teachers. As we can see in the charts, a very small number of teachers passed the examination in 2014, 406 out of 12,000 and 412 2042, or approximately 3%. This figure clearly shows how low oral language proficiency level of teachers in Uzbekistan was, thanks to certain measures taken over the years. The figure rose up to 24% in 2021. We believe that the above-mentioned policy changes made a great contribution to improve foreign language teaching in Uzbekistan. Thank you for your attention. Thank you, Vicky.
Thank you, Sardor. I'll pass you back to Professor O'Sullivan.
Yes, as I turn on my camera, etc. Thank you, Sardor. And now we move to the final presentation by Yarya. And after that, we'll be taking some questions. So if you're thinking about questions, please start writing them down, though we already have quite a few, but keep thinking. Thank you. And over to you, Yarya.
Thank you so much. For this part, I didn't prepare like slides, but I would like just to speak about the challenge that we have in introducing or practicing preset curriculum, but and also in higher education. There was conducted a research by Murat Kasimova in 2019, and she just presented her thesis dissertation, and she researched the assessment literacy of higher education teachers. And she studied the assessment proficiency of 100 teachers across Uzbekistan. The results underscored the significant gaps in teachers' pedagogical and technical knowledge of language assessment. It means that out of 100 teachers, 21% only could just perform appropriate literacy, and then the rest failed these situational tests or the assignments to show their assessment literacy. It means that still we have gaps or the challenges among teachers, and then they kind of fail performing their assessment literacy. And then at the end of the previous presentation, I just asked, are all teachers motivated? Do all teachers follow the assessment specifications, etc.? Not all of them follow the specifications, or they're not motivated. This goes to the cycle that we should pay attention. Like this is the cycle where all preset, for example, the cycle of in-service, pre-service teacher training, in-service, and then professional development, that is teacher training. They do not work together. They do not complete each other. So preset students receive or learn about assessment, but when they go to labor market, to school, to work as teachers, they face some challenges. They learn about alternative assessment, ongoing assessment, etc. But when they go to schools, they are asked to assess their students' knowledge or language proficiency with the help of tests, and that's it. And then what happens? They cannot apply all what they learn. And when they go, I agree with Svetlana Han that when they go to professional development or teacher training courses, so they even don't attend any assessment modules. There are only 2 or 3 topics that they cover. And then these professional development centers do not satisfy in-service teachers' demands. They only present the theory about assessment, but the practical parts is neglected. So that's why there must be kind of a link between these like pre-service, in-service, and professional development centers. And then also, we can say that if we speak particularly about preset, preset assessment profile has focused on mostly formative assessment. And then at the universities, teachers have 10 or 12 groups per week where they teach 16 students. And as a result, like if during 1 week they should assess more than 100 or 160 students assignments. And because of that, there are some places or that it makes it challenging, or the life of teachers at the universities make challenging, and then they neglect or ignore some assessment tools, and then they can just use the tests, as Svetlana Han mentioned, or they do not follow the assessment specifications. And another one is, I would like to mention about the preset exit test. Before, students' knowledge, I mean the graduates' knowledge, were assessed according to, I mean the exit test focused on theoretical questions about the theory of language, theory of grammar, etc. But with the collaboration, I mean with the help of British Council, there was formed group of teachers, I mean the test designers, and a new exit test was produced. And I would like, we need to mention the huge contribution of Rod Balaita, and then I found out that he is attending now this conference. He was the program consultant, and then there was worked out like 4 skills based, and then in addition to this, like grammar and then vocabulary based tests, I mean where grammar and then language skills were integrated. And this was presented, but again, this test has C1 level. It means that when students graduate from the university, and then if they get C1 level, this kind of maybe certificate should be given to the graduates of preset students, because when they graduate, they take this test, this assessment, but if they achieve or have C1 level, they do not receive any certificate, for example, right? But still we face challenges here. Not all the universities use this exit test, and they still have the old version, like theory-based tests or the question answer papers, etc. We can say that at the end, maybe like we can just suggest teacher training is okay. I mean, yes, students should attend teacher training, or they should have professional development, but maybe they must be like, it's like kind of suggestion or like idea, should be kind of assessment centers opened at each university or at each institution, where students, teachers can go and then have consultation, they practice their assessment design skills, etc. Yes, that's it. So all in all, like these are the challenges that we face in applying this program. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and apologies for interruption, but
sure.
Move along because we have several questions. I'll pass you back to Professor O'Sullivan.
Okay, I'm on. Thank you, Yaya, and to all of the panel members for some really interesting input. We have quite a few questions already, so I'm going to go back to the start, the first presenter, Rav, with a question. With your Taiwan hat on, but thinking about the possibility of Uzbekistan as well. Rav, do you think that Uzbekistan might need its own version of the CEFR, as is the case in Taiwan? Is necessary, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, based up, thanks, Barry, for that question. I mean, it's, I think yes is the short answer. The CEFR has been, as you know, very successfully localized in Japan with the CEFRJ, and that is something that the Ministry of Education have decided to do in Taiwan as well, and they've recently commissioned development of a common framework of reference for Taiwan, because although the Common European Framework of Reference is obviously an incredibly useful tool, framework to help align the curriculum with the assessment delivery, and to make sure that everyone is speaking the same language when it comes to talking about the various components of the English language education system. There are different needs in different places, and the Common European Framework of Reference has been the use of a framework designed for Europe has created its own set of challenges in Taiwan, and people aren't necessarily, they don't necessarily use the framework in the way that it was intended. And it can lead to some confusion when people are using it for unintended purposes or not using it as it was intended. So developing the framework, localizing the framework for Taiwan will make sure that it's fit for purpose, will make sure that the different levels of proficiency and the descriptors for those levels of proficiency meet the needs of learners and educators in Taiwan. And I would imagine that that would be the same case in Uzbekistan or anywhere else that was looking to develop the English language education system.
Thank you. Would anybody, one of the Uzbekistan speakers, like to comment on that? Do you think it might be a good idea or it might not be?
And just to kind of chip in with some of the considerations that we've been thinking about in Taiwan, is it can be kind of daunting and it can be off-putting to think about the need for developing a framework of reference from scratch, as happened in China. But I think that given the work that's been done on developing the CFR itself and then localizing it in Japan, I think there's it doesn't have to be. It's not the case of having to develop a brand new framework from scratch and the time, the effort and the resources that would be involved in that. It is just about localizing an existing framework, which is a much less daunting challenge.
Svetlana, do you have a comment?
I want to say that when you, Barry, were talking about this project reforms implementations, and you pointed very interesting facts, which I jot down on the paper. So to get support from people on the ground is a key to success. This is, I think, number one, which we must put like on the wall in big letters. And we must learn how to communicate with all stakeholders. Now we are a newly developed agency. It was half a year we are like born, and we really want to work with all. And as Barry said, it's very important to learn how to communicate with all stakeholders, how to involve them, and to see the role of each. So
thank you. So, Svetlana, you've just actually answered the next question that I had in line to ask you, which was about communication. So let's move on to another question, which I think you also might have a comment on, which is, what data do we need to make decisions in Uzbekistan, and how do we get that data?
Usually we get data from baseline studies. For example, we did 2 big baseline studies with the British Council. So the huge team went across the country, and as I said before, we visited 31 universities, and we talked to teachers, students, and we observed lessons. We analyzed the materials they use, syllabi they created, and so on. This and we collected a huge amount of data, very useful data, to start working and moving into the direction of improving the system. Can you unmute yourself, Barry, if you're talking?
Yeah. Do you have a comment to make on that?
Yes, like if data about the performance of students or the teachers, then observation is also a good tool for collecting data. And then questionnaire, I guess.
And how do you see the level of the language proficiency level of students in the current system? Is there strong data to establish a baseline for that?
Actually, time has changed since this curriculum was applied, but now the current situation, the level is much higher than it was before. Last 5 years, students come with B2 level. Many of the students come with B level proficiency of language level. because they take this language testing centers test on 4 skills. Then they prepare, get ready for those tests. And we have also students who take this entrance test where they focus on grammar, vocabulary, and then reading. That's why we can say that mixed ability students we have, both with B1 level and then B2 level. Even there are like C1 level students come as first-year students.
All right. That's interesting. It would be interesting to get a good solid picture of that, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
To get all the data together in one place. But it does sound really, really positive. We had a mention there of the testing centers tests. Sardar, what do you see as the future for the testing center?
Thank you for the question. The future of our testing center, I think now we need to digitalize our tests. Our main goal now, aim is to digitalize all our tests. First of all, in next year, we want to launch digital tests for online tests for language assessment. And from the 2024, we are planning to take the online tests for university admission.
All right, it's very ambitious plan to go digital. It's been a challenge that everybody has been facing over the last few years. And what do you see as the main challenge in there to get to a position where you can deliver digitally?
Challenge, first of all, the computer classes. We need to build our own buildings in all regions of Uzbekistan, firstly. And then we need to make this special software with the artificial intelligence. I'm talking about our plan.
Yes.
Because the cheating and using the mobile phones in our exams, a lot of the applicants try to use the mobile phone, and another telecommunication things. That's why we need to make the software with the artificial intelligence, which from the web camera, we could control the applicants. This is our, this is the main challenge.
Yeah, I think the whole area of artificial intelligence is particularly interesting.
Yeah.
I know we have various projects where we're looking at artificial intelligence to help with the item development, test development, scoring, and invigilation, as you say. It's a mighty challenge. But just turning back to Yarya for a question directly aimed at your area. So what do you see as, what are teachers' views and attitudes towards assessment, particularly considering current practice and proposed changes?
So the changes, we can just refer those as teachers and then as test takers, because teachers now are eager to take these 50 bonus tests or 15% tests, and then they are working on their language. They have like this extrinsic motivation, that is financial one. And then in order to increase the salary, they're working on their language. Before maybe they were not motivated enough. I mean, not so much, but nowadays they're improving their language. But in the classroom also, regarding their own assessment that they apply, we have, like, as I have mentioned, that we have like B2 level, C1 level students who come from different schools and then who attend language centers, etc. And then teachers, don't use now traditional assessment. They try to meet the demands of students. So they're working on their assessment and then also they're improving their assessment skills also, and together with teaching skills.
And where does the development of assessment skills for teachers come from? Like in preset, inset?
Both, we can say. If teachers come from preset, they develop their assessment skills as preset students. I mean, if they run through preset curriculum, but we have like another generation of teachers, and they attend teacher training or some other international teacher training, and then also while teaching. So in this way, they improve their assessment skills or proficiency.
Yes, that whole area of, sorry, Svetlana.
Yes, so very often we talk to teachers from public schools. And for example, just last month, we discussed the issues with how to improve these teacher training courses, upgrading courses. And teachers said that they need special courses, modules, like learning with young learners or assessment module. So that's why we work also with experts from the Ministry of Public Education, trying to improve and to make the program which will meet teachers' demands and wishes. So, and as I said, assessment is also one of the demands of teachers. So they want to learn how to do it properly.
Yes, and I know we have been running now for about 3 or 4 years a MOOC, an online MOOC for teachers for assessment literacy, and it's been amazingly successful. We've been shocked at how many teachers from around the world have been doing it and how interested teachers from around the world seem to be or are becoming in assessment. I think for many years, assessment was the sort of bad boy of language teaching, and nobody wanted to do it and nobody wanted to support it. And you had people like me banging the drum, you have to do it. But luckily, finally, now people are listening. And speaking of finally, we're coming towards the end of this panel, but I'd like each panel member now to reflect very quickly, just like 1 or 2 sentences, on, is there a single critical piece of advice you can offer policymakers? We'll start with Ralph. We'll go through the list as it happened. You can be thinking about that. So Ralph, you have the least time to think.
Oh, that's okay, because I mean, I've been talking to you about this for a couple of years now. So I think the number 1 piece of advice I would say would be consult your stakeholders and consult them early. Get that input from the teachers, get that input from the parents, get that input from policymakers, from anybody with a vested interest in the language policy, and listen to them, understand them, and act upon the input that you get, because that, the key to success is ensuring that stakeholder buy-in. Many of the challenges that we're faced with in Taiwan is the resistance to change from stakeholders. So that would be my 1 piece of advice: get that stakeholder buy-in early and throughout the journey.
Thank you. That's really useful. And Svetlana.
Yeah, all our today's discussions, how to move from policy to implementation, has lots of insights and lots of useful advice we've got from all discussions. And I think, as I said already, putting all efforts together, talking to all stakeholders, listening to them, and helping each other. So, and involving, as Ralph said, not only the ministry level or policy makers, but involving all all stakeholders, including students, including pupils, including parents. So all voices must be listened to. And when they feel that they are heard, then we can achieve the goals. When they see that this is not something like exported from another country ideas, like alien ideas, but the ideas which are developed in the country, yes, with the help of some international expertise, but really something which belongs to the country, then I think we can really move on all things and improve the situation in the country.
Thank you. I like that idea of localization. I think that's a good idea. Sardar, you're next, so you are on mute at the moment. And he's still on mute. So just while he gets himself organized, we go to Yaya.
Okay. Actually, I agree with Svetlana Khan, but at the same time, just policymakers should listen to the demands of language learners. This is very important. At the beginning of this day, there was asked questions like, why do students learn English? Why do they need this English? So they should listen to the demands of students and then create the policies that meet the demands of this real life context, maybe, and then the demands. This is very important, I'd say.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
And Sardar is back.
Yeah. In my opinion, when we take a decision, we should think big and consider the viewpoints of all stakeholders, and only after this take a decision.
Thank you for a nice, short, sharp response. So thank you to all of the panel members for today. And I'm going to hand you back to Vicky now, who's going to wind down the for me, morning, but for you, afternoon, evening.
Yeah.
So thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
And thank you very much to Professor Sullivan, and most of all, thank you very much to all the panelists for your very interesting and relevant contributions, much appreciated. And it certainly sparked a lot of conversation in our chat box. So before I talk about day 2 of the conference, I'd just like to take a couple of minutes to briefly summarize some of the important points of day 1. And I'd like to first start with Professor O'Sullivan's plenary and the importance he mentioned of aligning the elements of curriculum delivery and assessment, and how they all must be driven by standards, and also the absolute essential need for a good communication plan for stakeholders. Professor Green, in his plenary on washback and consequences, mentioned the need to align not just those elements that Professor Barry O'Sullivan mentioned, but also to align test tasks with the actual types of tasks that students will encounter in the real world. So what he called target tasks. And also that we also need, obviously, that overlap and to bring that into the classroom as well. Now, Yaira talked about the interesting history of the preset and the initiatives for reform, and also the improvements in both the language modules and the methodology modules. And she sort of finished around that absolute need for assessment literacy for teachers. And some of the points of our panel was on the importance of data for future decision-making, especially in policy. And we also heard from Sardar about the test centres' involvement and their evolution rather, and their current work with teacher assessment. And also Sardar mentioned the ambitious plans around going digital and using AI for test security by remote proctoring. And then Yaira obviously mentioned the challenges of in-service demands for in-service assessment literacy for teachers, and how there needs to be a link between what teachers actually experience and their demands for in-service and then pre-service and also continuous professional development. And then Ralph obviously talked about his views on localization of the CEFR for Uzbekistan contexts. And I think Svetlana also really stressed the point around teachers and the importance of language assessment. So tomorrow is day 2 of our conference, and in tomorrow we will be focusing on preparing teachers to implement policy. Today was about policymakers and how we move from policy to implementation, and tomorrow we will look at teacher education and teacher training. And we have the honor of welcoming Associate Professor Christine Coombe, who will talk about teachers and assessment literacy. And Christine has been talking about language assessment literacy for teachers even before it became a topic. So she's really a pioneer in this field. And we will have an excellent panel discussion around this subject as well, around the improving teaching and learning by improving assessment knowledge and skills. And we have a whole host of panelists from Uzbekistan, India, Taiwan as well, and from Cambridge, from one of our partners, Cambridge. And after the panel discussion, we have a workshop by Cambridge Assessment, and they'll be talking about courses for teachers, TKT, so teachers' knowledge of teaching. So hopefully you'll join us for day 2. Tomorrow we start at the same time. I hope you'll join us. And thank you once again to all our speakers. And most of all, thank you to our audience for your patience and your active participation. I look forward to saying hello to all of you again tomorrow morning at the same time, or tomorrow afternoon in Uzbekistan. Thank you very much, and I hope you have a lovely afternoon and evening. Thank you very much.